Chapter 78, NT. Thanks to Thomas Edwards, New Zealand, Samantha Weaver, New Zealand, and Jan-Erik Dux, Germany, for sponsoring this chapter. Chapter 78. Like a dead dog, however, Yishuan was quite used to his special way of cultivation, and he needed to arrange for surplus spirit stones to continue practicing in the special space. After entering into the Xiantian realm, the crazy consumption rate of spirit stones had led to a rapid increase in his strength and speed to a terrifying extent. People of Shaoyang Yuan School were also giving somewhat strange looks to Yishuan, because they did not know why disciples of Qingfeng Mountain Yuan School looked so overjoyed after the sudden appearance of this young man. "Who are you?" Huicheng asked. "Qingfeng Mountain Yuan School's Yishuan." Yishuan indifferently said. "Who wounded my brother? It was him. That Huicheng." "Yes, it was him." Many of the disciples of Qingfeng Mountain Yuan School immediately said while pointing towards Huicheng. "So what if it was me?" Huicheng looked at Yishuan with disdain and said, "Are you that Yifeng's younger brother? That Yifeng is a guy with an undeserved reputation and mediocre strength. That's all he is," Huicheng said indifferently. "NT. With an undeserved reputation, idiom. Unwarranted fame. You are just an ignorant dog who has actually dared to venture into our territory." Yishuan looked maliciously at Huicheng and said. At this time, the conflict between the two sub-schools had also attracted many onlookers consisting mainly of disciples living on the neighboring mountain peaks. Both Qingfeng Mountain and Shaoyang Yuan schools were one of a dozen or more sub-schools, and the disciples from these sub-schools had settled on dozens of mountain peaks. Although more than a dozen mountain peaks were occupied by the disciples of these sub-schools. But for the entire Yuan school, this was still a small and insignificant area and nothing more. The key figures of Yuan school, the elders, the high-ranked disciples, and others, all of them had their own separate mountain peak as personal domain. It was difficult to imagine how big Yuan school actually was. "You actually dared to abuse me," Huicheng shouted with an angry look on his face. "Abused? That was just the beginning, because now I will beat the crap out of you." Yishuan sneered, and in just a step, using Celestial Step, he arrived in front of Huicheng in a flash. "Did you think you could just come here and run wildly, and no one will punish you?" Yishuan mercilessly shot his big hand towards the face of Huicheng. Until a moment ago, Huicheng had been feeling triumphed when he suddenly saw Yi Zaiwen's hand coming towards him. He wanted to dodge but simply couldn't because Yi Zaiwen's speed was incredibly fast, almost like a whirlwind. And in an instant, Yi Zaiwen's hand had approached Huicheng's face. Bang! Yi Zaiwen's big hand slapped maliciously on the face of Huicheng. He suddenly screamed and spat out a mouthful of blood, and along with that, some of his teeth flew out. All the people present there had their jaws dropped. They knew about Huicheng's strength because being able to convert 20% of Zhenqi into Xiantian Zhenqi was rare for masters at such a young age. However, this Yishuan was simply too terrifying. His palm was so fast that Huicheng had been unable to dodge it and had suffered a severe slap on the face. Moreover, from the look on Yi Zaiwen's face, it seemed as if he hadn't put any effort at all. Shaoyang Yuan School's disciples broke out in cold sweat, and Qingfeng Mountain Yuan School's disciples were cheering for Yishuan because his strength really had become even more unfathomable and tyrannical. "You?" Huicheng looked at Yishuan with a look of disbelief. "What you?" Yishuan again slapped him on the other side of his face, and suddenly, a few more teeth went flying out. There was a huge difference between their strengths. Although Huicheng could be considered as an outstanding genius in the crowd of this year's disciples, who had already transformed 20% of his Zhenqi into Xiantian Zhenqi. If he had faced someone else, then he would not be so miserable, but to his bad luck, he had dared to provoke Yishuan. "I'll kill you." Huicheng was extremely furious in his heart and mind, because from infancy to adulthood, he had always been called a cultivation genius and had already gained fame at a young age by getting attention from everyone. But just now, he had received such humiliation. Both of his eyes had reddened, and one could see hatred for Yishuan in his eyes, who had humiliated him in front of such a large crowd, consisting of disciples from many sub-schools. When he had come to bully the disciples of Qingfeng Mountain Yuan School, Huicheng never thought that he himself would be bullied instead. Hua Cheng drew out his sword blade, and it brandished a dazzling sword light that instantly rushed towards Yi Shiwen with lightning speed. Hua Cheng's weapon is a jianshin, which is a sword blade. Although Hua Cheng did not have the strength to hit back in front of tyrannical Yi Shiwen, and had been slapped twice that had made him face such a disgrace in front of everyone. But he was strong and was indeed a genius of Shaoyang Yiyuan school, and at this time, the strength of a master of peak Xiantian first stage completely unleashed in this sword attack. Yi Shiwen sneered and used Rushing Thunder Hand to instantly grasp Hua Cheng's sword blade. Dang! A loud metal clashing sound resounded everywhere, and Yi Shiwen actually firmly grabbed Hua Cheng's sword blade in his hand. Bang dang! Bang dang! Bang dang! Yi Shiwen kneaded that sword blade as if it was made up of clay, and its size decreased section by section. After entering into the Xiantian realm and practicing tyrant body technique to such a profound level, not only his strength had increased dramatically, but the toughness of his body had also increased to such an extent that now it had become difficult for weapons like spears and swords to hurt him. Yi Shiwen kneaded the sword blade along with the sword key and directly snapped it. How is this possible? Hua Cheng simply couldn't believe his eyes when his sword blade snapped in the grip of Yi Ziwen's hand. Yi Shiwen sneered, and without giving any chance to Hua Cheng, he rushed like an azure dragon rising out of the abyss and instantly trod on his chest. Bang! Hua Cheng couldn't respond, and his body was sent flying like a broken kite, upside down, directly towards the several disciples of Shaoyang Yiyuan school with such a forceful impact that made them to fly out, and most of them fainted immediately. Get the hell out of here! With a cold look in his eyes, Yi Shiwen said, You absolutely cannot barge into this place, because it belongs to our Qingfeng Mountain Yiyuan school. Keep that in mind. All of the disciples of Shaoyang Yiyuan school were giving angry looks to Yi Shiwen, but did not dare to say anything. After all, a powerful Xiantian master like Hua Cheng had been beaten so easily, and they were not even in the Xiantian realm. So, how could they dare to say anything to a tyrannical Xiantian master like Yi Shiwen? Although they were at the peak of Hodian 9th stage, and Xiantian realm was only one step across, but the difference was like heaven and earth between the Hodian realm and Xiantian realm. At this time, the disciples of other Yiyuan schools started talking about Yi Shiwen among themselves. Who is he? Why haven't I seen him before? Quite fierce. That Hua Cheng was definitely not weak, but he still couldn't hit back like a dead dog. Regular release of Chapter 79 in few hours. I would suggest those who live in a time zone where it's already night to go to bed, because it may take time. Chapter 79 This chapter is a regular release. Chapter 79. Father becomes the ancestor. I never thought that there was actually such a fierce man in Qingfeng Mountain Subschool. Right, Qingfeng Mountain Subschool is located in the remote areas of Great Yu State and rarely produces any powerful masters, but I never expected to see such an incredible master originating from there. Gee, it seems like things are going to be interesting because their genius has been defeated so easily, and Shaoyang Subschool won't easily forget about this. Yes, I heard that the Shaoyang Subschool also has a very strong genius, and his strength is close to the strengths of several seed disciples. What is that guy called again? He is called Wen Shiyang. Yes, that's it, Wen Shiyang. Except those few seeds disciples, he can be considered a very powerful master. Gee, I did not expect Qingfeng Mountain Subschool to have such a fierce character like him. He definitely didn't use his full strength against Hua Cheng, and I am sure that when the time comes, we will get to see his true strength. Seeing that people of Shaoyang Subschool had started to leave, Yi Shiwen did not stay there for too long and ran towards the inner courtyard. After entering the inner courtyard, he asked, What the hell is going on? How did these bastards dare to bully our people? Zhang Yang looked at Yi Shiwen with a baffled look in his eyes. Yi Shiwen had become even more powerful than the last time, and earlier, Zhang Yang had been able to see through his cultivation level, but now he absolutely couldn't see it at all. Although originally, Yi Shiwen always had a superior fighting strength and had also beheaded a Xiantian master, but at that time, he was still in the Hodian realm and his cultivation was visible to others. But now that he had transformed half of his Zhen Qi into the Xiantian Zhen Qi, his inner state had easily surpassed Zhang Yang. who had only transformed 10% of his Jinqi into Xiantian Jinqi. Although Yi Shiwen was still in the Xiantian first stage, but his fighting strength was comparable to a master of Xiantian third stage. All of this had occurred in a few months' time, and if he had not personally seen it, he probably would not have believed it. Few months ago, he had heard from Yi Feng about his young brother that he was just a master of Houtian third stage and was not even qualified to become a core disciple. But in these few months, he completely changed. But anyway, Yi Shiwen was also a disciple of Qingfeng Mountain Subschool, and the stronger he would be, the better for the reputation of their school. This is not the first time. We have been dealing with those guys from Shaoyang Subschool for days, and each time, they come looking for a fight with new and ridiculous excuses. This time, they wanted to occupy our place. That's really outrageous, Zhang Yang said in an angry tone. This was obviously a case of Shaoyang Subschool's subterfuge, because this mountain peak was so big that it could accommodate even 500 disciples at once. So all they were trying to do was nothing more than finding a pretext to come and bully us. Before, I was not present here, and your elder brother had an argument with them, and they injured him, Zhang Yang explained. Them? There was someone else? Yi Shiwen asked. Yes, if it was only that Huicheng, then your brother with 20% transformed Xiantian Jinqi was enough to handle him. Although Huicheng's 20% Xiantian Jinqi transformation was superior to your brother, but he would still have been able to protect himself. The main reason behind his injuries was the strongest disciple of Shaoyang Subschool, called Wen Shiyang, who was already a master of Xiantian second stage. He was the one who seriously wounded your brother. I came back and saw that Huicheng was about to destroy your brother's cultivation and rescued your brother. By that time, Wen Shiyang had already left. Zhang Yang explained the matter to Yi Shiwen. What? Yi Shiwen did not know that they were going to destroy Yi Feng's cultivation, otherwise he would not have showed mercy to Huicheng by only injuring him with a kick. He would never have allowed him to get away so easily. However, it was really amazing that Yi Feng had not only entered into Xiantian realm, but he could transform 20% of his Jinqi into the Xiantian Jinqi in such a short time of 3 months. Excellent natural talent. But their school had issued a Xiantian pellet to them very late, unlike other subschools where they gave Xiantian pellets to train some geniuses, years before sending them to the main sect. When Qingfeng Mountain Subschool had inquired, they found out that many disciples had already entered into the Xiantian realm in other subschools, and even without the resources, Yi Feng had achieved the same feat by taking the same time for breaking through to the Xiantian realm. So, considering the natural talent of Yi Feng, his breaking through to the Xiantian second stage was not surprising for Yi Shiwen. But anyway, under the tilt of the main sect and its abundant resources, the advantages of the using resources for cultivation in the last few years could be regarded as nothing. When Yi Shiwen heard that Yi Feng had been wounded and had almost lost his cultivation, he suddenly became furious. In order to bully the disciples of Qingfeng Mountain Subschool, they were willing to go as far as destroying someone's cultivation. This time, Shaoyang Subschool had really crossed the line. Who is the elder sent for escorting our school's group to main sect? Where is he right now? Yi Shiwen asked, because in general, these subschool disciples would not go alone to the main sect, and the elders would accompany them inside the school. One reason was to protect them from any accident the way to main sect, and secondly, also to protect them from getting bullied in the main sect. This was the world which followed the rule of might is right, and strength was the only parameter that measured everything. And the other reason was that these subschools would exploit their connections with their disciples in the future. Although now, they studied in the main sect, but human relations could be useful to a great extent, and when these disciples would become high-level experts or key figures in the main sect, they would then become the biggest backers for these subschools. This time, Ancestor Lin has come with us, Zhang Yang said. Ancestor Lin? Yi Shiwen asked in surprise. How could the ancestor personally escort them? Because it was never expected of an ancestor to personally escort the disciples to the main sect, as it was the job of an elder. I see. You left early, so you do not know. Ancestor Lin Zhantian has already retired, and the new ancestor of Qingfeng Mountain Yuan School is your father. Zhang Yang said. What? Yi Shiwen was startled. So, He only left for a few months, and such a big change took place in the school, where his father actually became the ancestor of Qingfeng Mountain Yuan School. Although Yi Kongming was originally an elder, but the status of an elder or an ancestor could never be same. The status of the ancestors of subschools was comparable to that of the true disciples of the main sect, and his father had directly been promoted from the position of an elder to that of an ancestor. 1 month ago, Ancestor Lin resigned and has come to the main sect for debriefing. Zhang Yang explained. Where is the Ancestor Lin right now? Yishuan asked. Raised so far. $38, 127%. Monday. Chapter 80 will come as a regular release along with sponsored Chapter 81. Tuesday. Chapter 82 will come as sponsored Chapter Q cleared for sponsored Chapter 81, 100%. Q status for sponsored Chapter 82, 27%. Chapter 80 and T. This chapter is a regular release. Sponsored Chapter 81 will come in few hours. Chapter 80, dropping in to fight in the normal course of events. He ought to be here to protect them. But now it's such a critical time, they actually could not find him. If Lin Zhantian was here at that time, then all of this would never have happened, and Yi Feng would not have been seriously injured by them. About this, we do not know where the Ancestor Lin is right now. When Ancestor had just arrived, he was summoned, and not just him. Elders of other subschools were summoned as well. Zhang Yang said, although at this time, the position of their subschool's ancestor had been taken over by Yi Kongming, but since his childhood, Zhang Yang had been using the term ancestor to refer Lin Zhantian, and therefore, suddenly changing his habit of calling him ancestor was somewhat difficult for him. Also, no one would go to tangle over such a trivial matter. It seems like something happened, and that's why they were called on a short notice. While talking to Zhang Yang, Yishuan entered the room and glimpsed at Yi Feng, who was lying on the bed. His complexion looked pale, and his breath was also intermittent, and Yi Rushue was on his side, taking care of him at the moment. Yishuan had not seen Yi Rushue for the last 3 months, and right now he noticed that her breath was still firmly fixed on the peak Hodian 9th stage, and there seemed to be a thin line, and once she broke through this line, then she would be able to break through to the Xiantian realm, and with the help of Yi Zaiwen's Xiantian pellet that he had left for her, this was only a matter of time. According to Yi Zaiwen's judgment, Yi Ruxu's strength had already stayed at the peak of Hodian 9th stage for some time and had fully consolidated, and there was a high possibility that she might experience a breakthrough this month and enter into the Xiantian realm. Brother, sister, Yi Shiwen strode inside. Little brother, you are back. Yi Feng noticed Yi Shiwen coming inside and smiled, but he had suffered serious injuries and suddenly, his face twitched. Brother, you must avenge our elder brother That one Shiyang and Hu Cheng went simply too far, Yi Rushue indignantly said. Yi Shiwen also remembered that in his memories when he was small and would often get bullied for being weak, both Yi Feng and Yi Rushue would always come to his rescue, and therefore, the bond among 3 siblings had always been extremely strong. Although there was no blood relation between Yi Shiwen and the other 2, but the 3 of them were more intimate than blood-related brothers and sisters. Junior sister Yi, since you were inside the room, you missed the fight where Brother Yi directly humiliated Hu Cheng in front of everyone and tidied him up like a dead dog. At this time, Wu Hao answered for Yi Shiwen. Really? Yi Rushue said with a surprised look on her face, but she was also worried for her younger brother. Now, Yi Shiwen had been recognized by everyone as Qingfeng Mountain Subschool's strongest disciple, and Yi Feng was the second. If they could come to beat Yi Feng, then Yi Shiwen would naturally be their next target. But according to Wu Hao's statement, Hu Cheng had been defeated effortlessly by Yi Shiwen, and while Wu Hao was explaining things in detail, Yi Feng saw an indifferent look on Yi Zaiwen's face that made him resemble a person tired of war. It was not that he doubted Yi Zaiwen's strength, but thought that it was too inconceivable that Yi Shiwen had so easily tidied up that Hu Cheng. If what Brother Wu said is right, then little brother, you have already vented my anger. Yi Feng grinned and said, Vin, it's still too early. Yi Shiwen coldly said, how can you possibly consider this matter as finished? Yi Shiwen's words were filled with killing intent. Originally, Yi Shiwen had counted on the elder who had come with the group to the main sect, but it seemed that he couldn't count on that at the moment, But when he heard that the elder of the Shaoyang subschools had also gone for the summons, he immediately had an idea that rather than asking someone else for help, he might as well just ask himself. Today, things might have gone worse if he had not arrived at a critical moment, and when Yi Shiwen watched Yifeng lying on the bed, finding it difficult to move, he was even more infuriated. How could he possibly let them off? People of Shaoyang subschool were waiting for a chance when their elder was not present otherwise if he was present. Then their plan to bully Qingfeng Mountain subschool would most likely have failed. Because their elder, sent to the main sect along with these elite disciples, was also an incredible master and could easily deal with the Xiantian-level disciples as well. And today, when all of the elders had been summoned, the people of Shaoyang subschool immediately came to bully the people of Qingfeng Mountain. They had obviously not come for taking over the courtyard, and it was purely an excuse to provoke the disciples of Qingfeng Mountain subschool and nothing more. Yi Shiwen pulled out a bottle of medicinal pellets from a storage ring. There were many bottles of medicinal pills inside the storage ring that he had got from the Xiantian master, Luo Tian, and these medicinal pills were good for injuries. Although Yi Shiwen had consumed most of the medicinal pills, but there were still some that he had saved for emergencies. After a dose of medicinal pills, Yifeng's face immediately changed for better, and he seemed to get better. A warrior's body itself was very strong, not to mention, these medicinal pills belonged to a Xiantian master, Luo Tian. Yi Shiwen estimated that Yifeng would be able to recover in 2 or 3 days and should be able to perform at full strength in the entrance examination hour. When Yi Shiwen saw that the condition of Yifeng had considerably improved after consuming the pills, he gave out a sigh of relief and said, "Brother, you just wait and see how I take revenge for you and vent your anger. Today, these Shaoyang bastards dared to come and bully us, and if I do not teach them a lesson, then won't that ruin our Qingfeng Mountain subschool's reputation? And everyone would think of us as people from a weak subschool." Yi Shiwen's words were deep and meant that only strong people commanded respect in this world, and weak were regarded as fools. Competition was present everywhere, and it was especially very fierce among the subschools. Only a powerful person could command respect, and if Qingfeng Mountain subschool didn't respond to the provocation of Shaoyang subschool, then it would definitely be regarded as a weak subschool. So if someone tried to punch, it was necessary to punch back even harder to prove one's strength in this world. Teaching Shaoyang subschool a lesson now was in the best interests of Qingfeng Mountain subschool. But this was just a secondary reason, and injuries of Yifeng were the main reason why Yi Shiwen was so fixated on punishing those bullies of Shaoyang subschool. Yi Shiwen ascertained the location of Shaoyang subschool's courtyard and immediately went out followed by many disciples of Qingfeng Mountain subschool. Shaoyang subschool's courtyard was located not far from the Qingfeng Mountain subschool's courtyard, and only after a while, Yi Shiwen was standing in front of Shaoyang subschool. Yi Shiwen stepped forward and shouted, "Wen Shiyang, get your ass over here!" Yi Ziwen's voice spread out along with a terrifying Zhen Qi throughout the courtyard, causing many nearby Shaoyang disciples to rush over to take a look at what was happening. "Who are you? How dare you to be so provocative and unruly in front of our Shaoyang subschool residents?" A young disciple came out and said, "Get lost." Yi Shiwen indifferently said, "You bastard, I will kill you." The young disciple suddenly rushed furiously towards Yi Shiwen, and his Quanjin twisted and blasted out of his fists and went towards Yi Shiwen. Yi Ziwen's big hand stretched out, and it seemed as if the Lingqi had condensed around his hand to form an iron wall. Yi Shiwen fiercely struck his hand into that disciple's body. Bang! The disciple directly flew out while spouting blood from his mouth and fainted instantly. This loud sound immediately attracted the attention of many disciples in the courtyard of Shaoyang subschool, and only after a moment, dozens of disciples had arrived and completely surrounded Yi Shiwen. Release of sponsored Chapter 81 may get delayed, so I would recommend those who live in the time zones, where it's already late, to not wait and go to bed slightly smiling face. Chapter 82 will come as a sponsored release on Tuesday. Raised so far, $38, 127%. Queue is cleared for Chapter 81, 100%. Queue status for Chapter 82, 27%. Chapter 81, NT. Thanks to Jan-Henrik Dux, Germany, for sponsoring this chapter. Chapter 81. When Shuyang comes out only after a moment, dozens of disciples from Shaoyang's sub-school had arrived and completely surrounded Yi Shiwen. Who are you? How dare you come to our Shaoyang sub-school and act so unruly? Many of the disciples from Shaoyang sub-school were angry, but among them were present some of those disciples who were part of Hua Cheng's group and had gone to bully the disciples of the Qingfeng Mountain. They immediately recognized Yi Shiwen and were suddenly frightened because they could vividly remember that scene where Yi Shiwen had bedeviled a Xiantian master like Hua Cheng, who was also one of the top genius disciples from their sub-school. Go tell Wen Shuyang to come out right now, Yi Shiwen shouted. These disciples from Shaoyang's sub-school had tried to take advantage of absence of the elders to thoroughly discredit Qingfeng Mountain sub-school and destroy its reputation. So all Yi Shiwen was trying to do was return the favor by doing the exact same thing, in the exact same pattern, to Shaoyang's sub-school, and intended to thoroughly defeat and crush their strongest disciple in front of everyone. Hua Cheng's reputation was not big enough, so defeating him didn't solve the purpose of tit for tat. So Yi Shiwen had personally come to play with Shaoyang's sub-school's strongest disciple. Who are you? How dare you call brother Wen's name in such a disrespectful manner? At this time, a young disciple, who appeared to be in his 20s, came out of the courtyard and looked firmly at Yi Shiwen. A mere man from Qingfeng Mountain sub-school, daring to act wildly in front of our Shaoyang sub-school. You are really courting death. The young man sneered, and within few steps, he had already arrived in front of Yi Shiwen with an extremely fast speed. And at this moment, the imposing aura of a Xiantian master instantly released from his body and spread out. Yi Shiwen immediately knew who this man actually was. He was named Su Liang and was one of the top 3 Xiantian disciples of the Shaoyang sub-school. Since Yi Shiwen had already met Hua Cheng and defeated him, and when this man came out, he referred Wen Shuyang as Brother Wen. So he was not Wen Shuyang as well, and could only be the 3rd Xiantian master of the Shaoyang sub-school, Su Liang. Su Liang's strength was very high, almost not under Hua Cheng's strength, which proved the fact that this year's batch of top disciples from Shaoyang sub-school was indeed very powerful, and no wonder they had dared to bully a rival sub-school. However, after transforming 50% of his Zhen Qi into Xiantian Zhen Qi, the strength of Yi Shiwen was now comparable to that of ordinary Xiantian 3rd stage masters. Also, his own cultivation was at the peak of Xiantian 1st stage, so how could Su Liang be his match? NT. Ordinary Xiantian 3rd stage masters are those who have only transformed 50% of their Zhen Qi into Xiantian Zhen Qi. Yi Shiwen raised his hand to block the incoming attack, and with a bang, a loud sound of air explosion resounded everywhere. Su Liang's offensive attack had been staggered right in front of Yi Shiwen, as if Su Liang had collided into a huge iron wall, setting off a terrifying blast that swept across. During the fight between Xiantian masters, almost each of their punches could easily burst into air explosions, causing the air to vibrate and shake violently, just like how the ripples dance violently on the surface of a lake, fluctuating and distorting its original calmness. Su Liang's eyes widened with a flash of surprise clearly visible in his eyes. He obviously did not expect Yi Shiwen to be able to easily block his blow, though his attack just now seemed hasty. But he knew in his heart that before coming out of the courtyard gate, he had already started to prepare a sudden surprise attack on Yi Shiwen. But he never thought that his planned-out offensive attack would be useless against Yi Shiwen, who was just standing there with his one hand on his front side, like an impenetrable iron wall. My turn! Yi Shiwen sneered and threw out a lightning-fast kick towards Su Liang, accompanied by a burst of crackling air explosions. Yi Shiwen's kick was so fast that it was blowing the sound of a whistle in the air, as it was going straight for Su Liang. Su Liang was well prepared and immediately leaped up to avoid Yi Shiwen's kick. But without any stagnation, Yi Shiwen did not even give him any time to gasp for a breath and immediately slapped out his palm. Rushing Thunder Hand passed like thunder and moved like the wind. For a time, Yi Shiwen's attack looked similar to the Ninth Heaven's thunder. Bang! Su Liang lifted his hand to block, but immediately, a sudden burst of cracking sound resounded in the surrounding. The bones inside Su Liang's arms had been broken under the direct impact of Yi Shiwen's palm attack, which possessed the strength of 19 dragons, which was quite terrifying, because Su Liang had only reached the strength of 2 dragons and could never rival Yi Zaiwen's tyrannical strength. Yi Shiwen had not even put any effort, and had just shot his palm, but even this was more than enough to instantly crush both arms of Su Liang. The sound of breaking bones had suddenly scared the crowd of Xiaoyang disciples. Ah! Su Liang screamed again and again. Although a few of them had already seen the one-sided beating of Hua Cheng at the hands of Yi Shiwen, and knew that he was very powerful, but they did not expect that Su Liang would be so drastically injured by a single attack from Yi Shiwen. Su Liang could not even stop a single move from Yi Shiwen. It was too fast to notice, but Yi Zaiwen's palm attack also had an essence of missing moon beheader present in it. He had already practiced missing moon beheader to the Deshang realm, and it had come in handy. Instead of using his long blade, he had used his fingertips to perform the skill of missing moon beheader. He had also integrated the essence of this skill inside his body, which had now become almost incomparably tough like the reinforced iron itself. Even without using his blade, though losing a bit of its true power and range of attack, this attack was still tyrannically powerful and effective. Having the skill of missing moon beheader, and along with the essence of his rushing thunder hand, his palm attack had become faster, stronger, and terrifyingly heavy. Bang! Yi Zaiwen's palm rumbled and shot into the chest of Su Liang, breaking his breastbone immediately. Yi Shiwen had tried his best to control the power in this palm attack otherwise. If left unconstrained, this attack would have instantly killed Su Liang. But even after restraining his strength, Yi Zaiwen's attack contained such a terrifying force that it had directly sent Su Liang flying into the crowd of Xiaoyang disciples, and the impact made him unconscious immediately. Silence. There was a pin-drop silence on the scene. When the spectating disciples of many sub-schools saw the instant defeat of Su Liang at the hands of Yi Shiwen, all of them immediately gasped. Immediately afterwards, a buzzing sound of discussions instantly filled the surrounding area. How is this possible? Su Liang was so easily defeated at the hands of this man. That palm attack was definitely an astonishing ability. This man is so powerful. I'm afraid he can easily compete with Wen Shiyang. And like always, these Xiantian masters will become stepping stones for someone else like that Hua Cheng and Su Liang. Although both of them are quite famous and would have become even more famous in the future, but now they have become a stepping stone for this man. It has always been this way. These geniuses contend with each other, and only the invincible ones walk the bloody path to success. I'll wait to become powerful enough to be able to walk on the same path. After this battle, regardless of the outcome, the name of this person will spread throughout the main sect, and I'm afraid that before long, a lot of people will come to challenge him. After defeating Su Liang, Yi Shiwen stepped forward and shouted, "Wen Shiyang, come out if you're truly a man. Who are you? State your name." This time, a purple-robed young man, with a dignified look on his face, came out of the courtyard. "You're Wen Shiyang?" Yi Shiwen glanced at him and said, "Who are you?" Wen Shiyang looked at Yi Shiwen and said, "Qingfeng Mountain Sub-Schools, Yi Shiwen." Yi Shiwen indifferently said, "Are you the one who wounded my brother? So you are Yi Feng's little brother. You dared to come here and actually caused ruckus and trouble for everyone. You are quite courageous, aren't you? But you should have thought before offending the school regulations." Wen Shiyang said, "Tuesday, Chapter 82 will come as a sponsored release. Raised so far, $18, 60%. Q status for Chapter 82, 60%. Chapter 82, NT. Thanks to Jan-Henrik Dux, Germany, Ivor Fennell, U.S., and Zachary Paul, U.S., for sponsoring Chapter 82. Chapter 82, Creative Concept, so you were Yi Feng's little brother. You dared to come here and actually caused ruckus and trouble for everyone. You are quite courageous, aren't you? But you should have thought before offending the school regulations." Wen Shiyang said, "School regulations?" Yi Shiwen laughed loudly. If people really cared about school regulations, then Yi Feng would not have been injured and all of this would not have happened as well. And those so-called school regulations were just an excuse to protect the weak. Strong never cared about these old regulations. Earlier, when Shi had bullied Yi Zaiwen's fellow disciples, then he did not think of school regulations. But now that the same thing had been done to his people, he suddenly remembered about it. It was quite hilarious. Cut the crap. Today I have come for just one thing, to return the favor by doing the same thing you did to my brother. Yi Shiwen sneered. You are courting death, Wen Shiyang said and glared at Yi Shiwen. He was the unrivaled genius of Shaoyang Subschool, and no one dared to talk to him like this. So, the words of Yi Shiwen had made him extremely furious. When Shiyang rushed forward, almost like a blurred figure, while breaking through the sound barrier, causing a terrifying, piercing sound which spread throughout the sky. Immediately after that, many spectating disciples directly fell on the ground with their eardrums bleeding from this terrifying sound. Clang! A long blade appeared in the hands of Wen Shiyang that he'd taken out from the storage ring, and in a flash, his blade instantly chopped out towards Yi Shiwen. Wen Shiyang was very powerful compared to Huicheng or Su Liang, and was already at the Xiantian second stage with 30% transformed Xiantian Jinqi. Although his transformed Xiantian Jinqi was only 10% more than the other two, but his strength was already twice their strength. Yi Shiwen didn't demur and immediately unsheathed the long blade from his back with a clang sound, and shot a terrifying bladiki towards the sky, and it seemed as if the moon was slowly rising. Instantly, the pressure dropped down in the surrounding area, clearly displaying that Yi Shiwen had already obtained a thorough understanding of his blade technique, and everyone was shocked when the true meaning of Yi Zaiwen's blade skill suddenly evolved in front of them. Although Wen Shiyang had also practiced a high-grade blade technique, but it was obvious that currently his blade skill was nowhere near the profound blade skill of Yi Shiwen. In a short time, Wen Shiyang would be able to reach the Desheng realm of his blade skill, and only then he might evolve out the creative concept of his blade skill. The difference between their mastery of blade skills alone was too big. What is this creative concept? I actually saw a moon pressed down by the blade attack. One of the disciples was stunned and said, Yi Zaiwen's blade technique could already bring forth the creative concept after it had been practiced to the Xiantian realm. And although the power of the move Full Moon Beheader was comparable to that of an advanced power technique, but Cold Moon Beheader was actually a Xiantian level blade technique. And even if the power contained in each of its moves were different, but all of them contain an inherent creative concept. Cold Moon Beheader is the name of Yi Zaiwen's blade technique, and Full Moon Beheader is one of the 3 moves offered by this technique. Only those power techniques which contained a creative concept could be called Xiantian power techniques, and if one could not bring forth the creative concept of a technique, then the Xiantian level techniques were no different from the advanced techniques. But if one could successfully understand and evolve out the creative concept of a technique, then the power of his technique would increase by leaps and bounds, and the technique would be able to display its ideal form. All of those outstanding disciples from different sub-schools who were watching from the crowd knew very well about the importance of the creative concept of a technique. They knew that even if someone was to practice a Xiantian level technique to the Desheng realm, they still might not be able to comprehend the creative concept hidden inside it, and would only be able to harness its strength up to the advanced stage. Being able to realize the creative concept at such a young age was extremely rare. This is really a creative concept, I have only seen elders displaying the creative concept their techniques. My God, how can it appear in the body of an ordinary person? Creative concept, it actually is a creative concept. Just by virtue of this creative concept, I'm sure that Yi Shiwen will easily enter into the current top 10 great disciples. Countless people were shocked, including Wen Shiyang, who was the closest witness of Yi Zaiwen's terrifying display of the creative concept of his blade skill. When this creative concept was brandished, a terrifying pressure had appeared in the surrounding area, as if the sky had fallen down on the ground, and it seemed like the bright moon had appeared, but it actually didn't exist. But Wen Shiyang could vividly feel as if he was taking a walk on a moonlit road, and the bright moonlight was coming down from the heaven and had spilled on the ground, revealing even the slightest detail present in the scenery, leaving nowhere for the secrets to hide under this pure white moonlight, which also contained a penetrating feeling. This kind of oppressive feeling had already made Wen Shiyang anxious about this fight, and his mind was also in a confused state. How is this possible? How is this possible? Wen Shiyang could not believe his eyes, because even practicing one move to the Deshang realm was very tough, and one could say that they had grasped the essence of the technique, but to be able to comprehend and display a creative concept was equivalent to completely commanding the power of that move to its utmost extent. Because all of these Xiantian-level techniques, or above, were once realized and created by the experts, and these techniques were the so-called imitations of nature itself. Hence, there would definitely be a creative concept hidden inside them. In fact, these creative concepts had initially urged those experts to comprehend the moves based on these creative concepts and append them to form the power techniques. And only after truly comprehending the move to its acme, Yi Zaiwen's blade skill had evolved to such a terrifying extent and had displayed this clear and beautiful, but overwhelming, scenery to the spectators. And Yi Zaiwen's display of the creative concept was extremely clear, indicating that he had thoroughly mastered the move. It was simply unbelievable. There was a look of disbelief in the eyes of Wen Shiyang. To think that Yi Shiwen had not just reached the Deshang realm of his blade skill, but he had also comprehended its creative concept? But he didn't have time to be shocked, because if Yi Shiwen had actually evolved this level of creative concept, then he was definitely in a dangerous situation. He would never know that Yi Shiwen had the special space. For others to be able to comprehend the creative concepts, they had to be very talented, but in Yi Zaiwen's case, so long as there were enough spirit stones in his possession, he would be able to completely understand and practice any technique. Yi Shiwen perhaps was not the most talented, nor the strongest, but he was hardworking, and so long as he had enough spirit stones, his practice speed would reach a terrifying level. Because for others to practice and comprehend was like going into a huge tract of a library and read a variety of books to have an understanding and gain insights. For that, they needed to have high talent in order to find out the exact direction they needed to search and to find the answers. And they were lucky. They might just find the right book. But this was not the case with Yi Shiwen, because he seemed to have an intelligent books resolution system that could select the correct book for him, and so long as he swiped the card to pay the money, he could obtain just the book he needed, which would automatically be delivered to him, and he wouldn't have to go into the vast sea of books to search. Even for those geniuses, the chances of comprehending the creative concept were not high, let alone those ordinary disciples. Yi Shiwen chopped down his long blade, and the live picture drawn by the creative concept directly descended over Wen Shiyang's bladiki and instantly crushed it down under its terrifying pressure, which seemed as if the whole world was collapsing inch by inch. Their bladiki collided in the midair, and the friction caused a loud and sharp whistling sound which then set off a wave of sound waves. Boom! Finally, Yi Zaiwen's bladiki instantly crushed the bladiki of Wen Shiyang and fiercely blasted into his body. Bang! Wen Shiyang's blade couldn't block this incredible attack from Yi Shiwen, and his body was sent flying horizontally, while he spat out a mouthful of blood. Wednesday, Chapter 83 will come as a regular release, along with sponsored Chapter 84 and 85, depending on donations and my schedule. Raised so far, $22, 73%. Q status for Chapter 84, 73%. Q status for Chapter 85, 0%. Chapter 83. T. This chapter is a regular release. Since the donation queue for sponsored chapters 84 and 85 didn't clear in time, they will come as sponsored releases on Thursday. Chapter 83. Fame spreads, everyone was silent. One move, just a single move. In a flash, the spectating disciples had witnessed how the reputation of Wen Shiyang was zapped and completely overwhelmed by a single flash of Yi Zaiwen's Xiantian Bladiki. There was a huge difference between Xiantian and Hodian Jinqi, and 30% transformed Xiantian Jinqi, in fact, had incredible density and toughness, but he was still nowhere near to be Yi Zaiwen's match. Yi Shiwen had used his creative concept combined with his Bladiki to display such an incredible prowess, and everyone was aware of the fact that, at that time, if Yi Shiwen had not restrained his true strength, then Wen Shiyang would definitely have been split in half. Although school regulations were relatively wide, but were not wide enough to allow killing someone in front of a large crowd, at least, Yi Shiwen was not powerful enough to override school regulations. But today, if even he had died at the hands of Yi Shiwen, although it would have caused trouble, but Xiaoyang's subschool's people could only swallow the bitter pill. All of their Xiantian masters had been defeated, and their own strengths were not good enough. Also, nobody would come to show their sympathy to them, because everyone knew that people of the Xiaoyang subschool were the real perpetrators this time, and this result was inevitable for them. Really finished, all of the outstanding disciples of Xiaoyang subschool had been defeated, and if they didn't recover in time before the beginning of school assessment, then Xiaoyang subschool wouldn't be able to participate in the assessment, because without its top 3 Xiantian masters, it would have no chance to win. This entry assessment of the main sect was not just an ordinary assessment, because it was directly related to the future developments of the various subschools. In the main sect, the resources and facilities were allocated to these subschools based on the performance of their outstanding disciples respectively. In the eyes of the main sect, although it allowed entry to weak disciples as well, but it only was a place for elite disciples from various subschools. So, of course, it would provide more rewards and resources to more powerful disciples, and these elite disciples would also get more resources in the coming year. This was the reason why the various subschools would not hesitate to spend their resources on these geniuses before sending them to the main sect. But now, all 3 Xiantian masters of Xiaoyang subschool had been devastated effortlessly, and that too in front of everyone. It was totally inconceivable that this year's Xiaoyang subschool was definitely the worst of the crowd, and this would directly affect the allocation of resources in the coming year for it. Earlier, when Xiaoyang subschool disciples had gone to bully the disciples of Qingfeng Mountain subschool, they would never have expected that things would come to this, and that too by the interference of just one man. The fight between these 2 men had directly determined the status of the 2 subschools, and the result of this fight was that the reputation of Qingfeng Mountain subschool had skyrocketed and become like a tough iron sheet, after completely destroying the reputation of Xiaoyang subschool. After this, he would thoroughly become famous. A disciple standing in the crowd murmured. As if a big rock had been dropped in a calm lake, in a flash, Yi Ziwen's fame had spread off like the intermittent waves. The news that Yi Shiwen had effortlessly defeated Xiaoyang subschool's strongest disciple, Wen Shiyang, had spread among more than 100 subschools. Originally among thousands of disciples, Wen Shiyang was not one of the strongest, and was only a minor celebrity. Even if Yi Shiwen had defeated Wen Shiyang, this was not that big of a deal for other elite disciples. But everyone present during the fight had seen how Yi Shiwen had used the creative concept of his blade technique to a profound level. This had made him to suddenly become a target and focus of attention of many people. In the Qingfeng Mountain subschool's courtyard, Yi Feng was standing. He was a Xiantian master, so his resilience was very tough. Plus, he had consumed a lot of high-grade medicinal pills provided by Yi Shiwen, so his condition had become a lot better and he could walk around easily. At this rate, he would be completely healed before the beginning of assessment. Nearby, Yi Shiwen and Yi Ruxue, his 2 siblings, stood quietly, and Zhang Yang, Wu Hao, and Qian Wanru were also present, making this a gathering of Qingfeng Mountain younger generation's top disciples. The news about Brother Ye's fight with Wen Shiyang has spread everywhere. After knowing that Brother Yi has used creative concept of his blade technique, I'm afraid a lot of people won't be able to sleep now. Now, they won't dare to underestimate Qingfeng Mountain subschool. Qian Wanru said in a very excited tone. Qingfeng Mountain was located in the remote areas of Great Yu State, and Qingfeng Mountain subschool was always discriminated against by the schools from bigger districts. Yes, I'm afraid there are people who cannot sleep, and it seems that some are deliberately adding fuel to the fire. Yi Feng said with a sigh. This news had spread so fast, so wide, that it was clearly not the result of self-propagation and natural dissemination, and it was certain that people were adding fuel to the flames. I think people just want to stir the muddy water. Zhang Yang frowned and said, Someone wants us to become the target of public criticism, and they may join hands to destroy us. There's a possibility that you may be right. It is true that in the past, our subschool had become friends with many subschools, but it also made a lot of enemies. And in a short time, we will come to know the inside and outside of this matter. Yi Feng said, It doesn't matter if they are deliberately spreading the news or adding fuel to the flames. If we want to stand out during the coming assessment, we must be prepared to face all of this. Yi Shiwen said, "It's quite simple. We will knock down anyone who tries to come in our way." Yi Ziwen's discourse revealed self-confidence. He knew that any plots or conspiracies were nothing in face of a formidable strength and could only accomplish elimination and nothing else. Ha ha ha. Right? What little brother said is absolutely right. We will overthrow any plots thrown at us, no matter which method they resort to. Yifeng laughed and said, "If someone wants to see what we are made up of, we will let them see enough. Our Qingfeng Mountain Subschool is not worse than any other school." Yi Shiwen said with a cold smile on his face. "Yes, that's right." Yifeng nodded, then turned to Yi Ruxue and said, "Now I am all right and can take care of myself, so you don't have to look after me anymore. Go. Use these few days left before the assessment to finish your closed-door training and try your best to break through to the Xiantian realm. At the time of assessment, we would be happy to have one more helper." Yi Ruxue looked at Yifeng, then nodded and said, "Okay." She also knew that if she did not break into the Xiantian realm, then she won't be of any help to them. She still had the Xiantian pellet, gifted to her by Yi Shiwen, and breaking into the Xiantian realm was now much easier for her than others. Without a Xiantian pellet, even in the environment of main sect, breaking through to the Xiantian realm would still take a lot of time and effort. Both Wu Hao and Qian Wanru were somewhat enviously looking at Yi Ruxue, but unfortunately, they did not have a Xiantian pellet, and it would take them some time before they finally enter into the Xiantian realm. Then, abruptly, a disciple of the Qingfeng Mountain Subschool hastily ran inside the courtyard and said, "It's bad. A person has come outside to challenge Brother Yi." As expected, they really came, Yi Feng said. "So fast." Zhang Yang frowned and said, "I'll go and take a look," Yi Shiwen said. Yi Shiwen went out of the courtyard and was surprised to find a white-robed youth coldly looking at him. This tall and sturdy young man's eyes had a faint Jin Qi which burst out and splashed in all directions. He was exuding an ice-cold chill aura which appeared to be coming out from the glaciers. When Yi Shiwen glanced at him, the youth seemed as if his whole body was frozen, just like a man made up of ice. Correction: in Chapter 62, I noticed a typo where I had written Yi Ruxue was 2 years older than Yi Shiwen, which was a typo, and it actually should be Yi Ruxue was 20 years old and 1 year older than Yi Shiwen. Thanks to Slawi for bringing this to my notice. Laughing face. Friday. Since Q didn't clear for sponsored Chapter 84 in time, so it will come as a regular release on Friday. Good night. Raise so far. $35, 116%. Q is cleared for Chapter 85, 100%. Q status for Chapter 86, 16%. Chapter 84. NT. This chapter is a regular release. Also, I announced the grand release of minimum 6 sponsored chapters, which may go up to 8 releases. These chapters will be released on Saturday and rest on Sunday, excluding 1 regular release on Sunday, depending on donations and my schedule. I decided to organize this grand release to compensate for the lost sponsored chapters this week. Let's see if I can reach my target of releasing up to Chapter 93 by Sunday. Chapter 84. The 3 major subschools, the disciples from many subschools had gathered around to watch this fight, and disciples from other mountain peaks had also arrived because Yi Ziwen's fame had attracted them here, and these disciples were very interested to take a look at the strongest disciple of Qingfeng Mountain Subschool, who had recently got the limelight. Yi Shiwen looked at the challenger and said, "Are you going to challenge me?" "Certainly," the man said. "Who are you?" Yi Shiwen asked. "Bingdao Subschool's Chu Sun." The man replied. NT. Bingdao means Iceland, Bingdao, so he was actually the disciple of Bingdao Subschool. No wonder. On the east coastline of the Great Yu State, near the sea, there were some subschools, but Bingdao was one of the most famous ones because the disciples there practiced ice attribute power techniques. Ages ago, the forefathers had set up this system, as there was a world of ice and snow in 300 miles radius of the seacoast, and was the best environment for practicing ice attribute techniques. The disciples who passed out from the Bingdao Subschool were always very powerful. Subschools could be divided into strong or weak categories, and Qingfeng Mountain Subschool was one of the relatively weak, But on the contrary, Bingdao Subschool had always been known as one of the three major subschools. In the crowd of subschools, Bingdao Subschool's strength was ranked among the best. Chu Sun. He is Bingdao's Chu Sun. No wonder his strength seems so formidable. A disciple exclaimed. So he is no wonder, excluding those three invincible masters. Chu Sun can be considered as one of the strongest. You are Chu Sun? Yi Shiwen said, after staying here for more than a day. It was not that Yi Shiwen did not know anything, and he had certainly been informed about the outstanding disciples of various strong subschools. This term's batch of subschool disciples was the strongest batch known for centuries, as if strong masters had literally reigned on the main sect. And the top three players among them were definitely the most outstanding disciples of the three subschools. In the past, the disciples of these three major subschools were the strongest, and therefore, they had obtained the most resources compared to other subschools and cultivated stronger disciples for the next term. With the repetition of this cycle, over time, these three subschools had gradually become the most formidable subschools with their strengths and resources far above other subschools. It could be said that, like always, all of the disciples of this session of the three major subschools were already in the Xiantian realm, and not only that, not a single Hodian realm disciples would be attending the assessment from these subschools. When Yi Shiwen heard this news, he could not help but held his breath in astonishment. All were Xiantian masters. What kind of ridiculous situation was this? It was said that these major subschools would put great and costly efforts to cultivate strong Xiantian disciples. And if the three major subschools would send more and more Xiantian disciples, then the other subschools had to spend as well on their outstanding disciples. Although they never expected to be better than the other three major subschools, but at least their own disciples wouldn't be easily bullied by the disciples of the three subschools. But because the Qingfeng Mountain Yuan School was situated far away in the remote regions of Great Yu State, they obtained the news very late. No one knew how strong the three invincible masters actually were, because no one had forced them to use the full strength. But the hierarchy of the disciples was well known to everyone, in which experts like Chu Sun held higher position compared to Wen Shiyang and others. In fact, Chu Sun was a lot stronger than Wen Shiyang. I hear that you claim to be the strongest subschool disciple, so I have personally come to teach you a lesson, so that you know the immensity of heaven and earth. Chu Sun coldly said. Certainly, it was not Yi Shiwen who had claimed to be the strongest disciple, but someone with ulterior motives, and they naturally didn't have good intentions for Qingfeng Mountain Subschool and its disciples. Whether I am the strongest disciple or not is none of your business, and you actually came to lecture me for this. Don't you have anything better to do? Yi Shiwen sneered and said. Anyways, this Chu Sun was really too arrogant. Just because he heard Yi Ziwen's name as the strongest disciple, he actually came to teach him a lesson? Does he really think that Yi Shiwen would just stand there and take his punches? You are courting death. Chu Sun had become furious. Who was he? He was a top disciple of Bingdao Subschool, one of three major subschools, but Yi Shiwen had dared to talk disrespectfully with him. Today I will cripple you and turn you into a pile of bones. Depends on you. Yi Shiwen repeatedly sneered. Chu Sun's figure suddenly flashed, and his zhenqi suddenly released out of his body. The ambient temperature of the surroundings steeply plunged, as if sucked into the world of ice and snow. Huge and ice-cold zhenqi aura had instantly turned the entire surrounding pure white, and the ferocious power of Chu Sun, which was far above Wen Shiyang, had properly displayed itself in front of everyone with his 40% transformed Xiantian surging majestically high into the sky. After breaking through to the Xiantian first stage, ordinary masters possessed 10% transformed Xiantian zhenqi, and only after transforming 20% of their Xiantian zhenqi, they could reach the peak of Xiantian first stage. Similarly, after reaching the Xiantian second stage, those with 30% transformed Xiantian zhenqi were considered ordinary third-stage masters, and only after transforming 40% Xiantian zhenqi, they could reach the peak of Xiantian second stage. Chu Sun was at the peak of Xiantian second stage, and compared to an average expert, he was extremely powerful. Chu Sun shot his palm with a snow-white zhenqi wrapped on his arms, resembling a pure white crystal, which was unusually beautiful, but incredibly dangerous. His palm viciously shot and directly froze the surrounding air while producing a crackling sound. When Yi Shiwen saw Chu Sun's palm approaching towards him, in an instant, Yi Shiwen moved his hands and shot him palms, covered in a terrifying Jin Qi, which directly moved forward towards the incoming attack. Bang! 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 Their fight immediately approached the acme, and in an instant, a dozen blows had been exchanged between the two. Chu Sun was amazed as he never thought that Yi Shiwen would be able to block his moves so easily. As one of the top disciples in Bingdao Subschool, although he was not the strongest, but he was still ranked among the top 5, but even so, he actually couldn't press down Yi Shiwen even after exchanging so many blows. He originally thought of Yi Shiwen as a boy who was boasting around after a little success, claiming to be the strongest disciple, but he never imagined that this boastful boy would actually be so strong. After coming to the main sect, many disciples bragged about themselves, but in Chu Sun's view, they were nothing but clowns. Even his big brother had never said that he was the strongest disciple, then how could this man act recklessly and claim himself as the strongest disciple? He was in a bad mood and had come to vent his anger on Yi Shiwen, but he never thought that fighting Yi Shiwen would be like kicking an iron wall. Could it be that you are only at this level? Yi Shiwen sneered and said. Raise so far, $300, 1,000%. Q is cleared for sponsored chapters 85, 86, 87, 88, 89, 90, 91, 92, 93, and 94. Thanks to Zachary Paul, U.S., Shauna Avila, U.S., Anonymous, Doha, and Sai Puklupti, UK, for sponsoring Chapter 85. Thanks to Amarija Andrews, U.S., and Suvanchantha, U.S., for sponsoring Chapter 86. Thanks again to Suvanchantha, U.S., for sponsoring Chapters 87, 88, 89, 90, 91, and 92. Thanks to Jeffrey Demonier, France, for sponsoring Chapter 93. Thanks to Thomas Metzger, U.S., and Corey Sagawa, U.S., for sponsoring Chapter 94. Chapter 85. And T. I start the Saturday's grand release with this chapter. Thanks to Zachary Paul, U.S., Shauna Avila, U.S., Anonymous, Doha, and Sai Puklupti, UK, for sponsoring Chapter 85. Chapter 85. The difference of 10, could it be that you are only at this level? Yi Shiwen sneered and said. Yi Shiwen shot his palms with a shabu, thunder-like rumbling sound, and this set of palm method in his hands could be considered superb. Bang! Yi Ziwen's palm shot, and Chu Sun raised his hand to block. Suddenly, with a loud noise, a great force transmitted into the arms of Chu Sun, which numbed from the shock. Chu Sun's ice-cold Jun Qi instantly covered all over his arms, suddenly covering with a burst of coldness and expelled the numbing feeling from his arms. He was extremely shocked in his heart. How could this man's strength reach such dreadful proportions? Whether it was Hua Cheng or Wen Shiyang, the strengths of both of them were far worse than the strength of Yi Shiwen, so they never had a chance against Yi Shiwen, also when they couldn't even force him to use his full force. In Yi Ziwen's fight with those two, he had easily defeated them in not more than a single strike that had directly broken all the bones in their bodies, causing them to lose consciousness immediately. The fight had finished so fast that the spectators did not get enough time to feel the real, terrifying strength of Yi Shiwen. Anyway, no matter how much force he had used, they would have fainted instantly. But Chu Sun was different, and even if Yi Ziwen's combat strength was equivalent to the ordinary masters of Xiantian 3rd stage, but Chu Sun's strength was also close to the Xiantian 3rd stage, though a bit less, and that was the reason why he had not directly fainted in one move from Yi Shiwen. But also because of this, everyone had got a chance to witness Yi Ziwen's terrifying strength of 19 dragons that had totally overwhelmed Chu Sun's strength of 9 dragons. Chu Sun was facing a master who possessed the strength more than twice his own strength. Transformed 10% Xiantian Jin Qi granted the strength of 1 dragon. 20% transformed Xiantian Jun Qi granted the strength of 2 dragons. But after transforming 30% Xiantian Jin Qi, one could reach the strength of 5 dragons. After transforming 40% Xiantian Jin Qi and reaching the peak of Xiantian 2nd stage, Chu Sun's strength had reached the peak strength of 9 dragons. Once he would break through to the Xiantian third stage after transforming 50% Xiantian Jinqi, his strength would further reach the strength of 10 dragons, which was still lower than Yi Zaiwen's current strength. After transforming 60% Xiantian Jinqi and reaching the peak of Xiantian third stage, one could gain the strength ranging from the strength of 20 dragons to 49 dragons. Since Yi Shiwen was already at the peak of 50% transformed Xiantian Jinqi and had reached the strength of 19 dragons, which was more than twice Chu Sun's current strength, each of his blows contained a terrifying strength and was instantly numbing the arms of Chu Sun. Although, like always, Yi Shiwen had not beaten Chu Sun in one shot, but he had already put Chu Sun in a tough situation where he was secretly crying incessantly in his heart. He was constantly shouting in his heart that what kind of monster was Yi Shiwen? Just from taking a look at him, no one could make a guess that a master of Xiantian first stage could actually possess such a monstrous strength. Chu Sun noticed that Yi Shiwen was only using his palm technique, but with brute force contained in each shot to actually force him into spending all his Jinqi just for defense. Such monstrous strength, even if it was inferior to the 3 invincible masters, but it was still equivalent to one of the top underplayers. How could such a figure appear in a small sub-school like Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School, located in the remote area of Great Yu State? But Chu Sun didn't get enough time to think about all that because of the relentless attacks of Yi Shiwen. It was clear that Yi Shiwen had thoroughly grabbed the upper hand in this battle. Pass like thunder and move like the wind. Lightning and thunder. Ghostly thunder axe. Leveling storm 4 strokes. These 4 moves of rushing thunder hand technique had been used by Yi Shiwen, as if they had been used by the god himself, with each of these moves containing tremendous strength, coming one after the other, almost with no pause, with perfection, producing thunder-like rumbling sound in between the moves, as if they contained the power of heavenly thunder. Chu Sun had been totally pressed down under Yi Zaiwen's non-stop strikes and was totally depressed. How could he not know about rushing thunder hand? This was a lower-level power technique taught in almost all sub-schools and throughout the Great Yu State. There were countless people who knew this technique, but no one had ever displayed this kind of might while using this technique. It was as if Yi Shiwen had fully assimilated the true essence of this technique and had displayed its ideal form in front of everyone. Even those elders could not be compared to Yi Shiwen when it came to mastery over power techniques. But for Chu Sun, the most depressing thing was that Yi Shiwen had used a lower-level power technique and displayed such a terrifying might that he had actually been completely pressed down and could only fight a defensive battle. After this, he would not be able to lift his head out of shame. When Chu Sun was a child, he had practiced a lower-level power technique for some time, but soon, when his cultivation level had progressed, he had soon abandoned it for practicing an intermediate power technique. And now that he had already practiced advanced power techniques and Xiantian power techniques, he would never even think of using a lower-level power technique in battles. But right now, he was being defeated by a lower-level power technique. He never thought that lower-level techniques could actually gain such terrifying might, especially when wielded by Yi Shiwen. Bang! 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 The metal clashing sound spread each time Yi Shiwen and Chu Sun collided and exchanged moves. A terrifying battle between the 2 powerful Xiantian masters was sending blast waves everywhere in the surroundings. This is so incredible. I did not think that Yi Shiwen would actually be able to fight off Chu Sun without losing for such a long time. Lose? It is obvious that Chu Sun has been completely pushed down by Yi Shiwen and his defeat is inevitable. A disciple laughed loudly and said, "Moreover, Yi Shiwen has not used his strongest technique yet. That day, I saw the true strength of his blade technique when Shiryang had lost in a single blade attack. But right now, Yi Shiwen has not drawn his blade, otherwise Chu Sun would not be able to withstand for so long. Wait until Yi Shiwen draws his blade, because then Chu Sun would not be able to play defensive like this." I never thought that this Yi Shiwen would actually be so powerful, and it seems that except for those 3 invincible experts, Yi Shiwen is definitely one of the top star-ranked disciples. Chu Sun's hands had gradually numbed with no way to relieve this numbness, even after using his Jinqi. He was still unable to accept this turn of events in his heart. How could this be? Yi Shiwen had not even drawn his blade and was already so powerful. Was Yi Shiwen going to defeat him without even using his blade? How is this possible? There was a difference of strength of 10 dragons between the strengths of Chu Sun and Yi Shiwen. Although Chu Sun was using a superior power technique than Rushing Thunder Hand, but by virtue of the degree of mastery over Rushing Thunder Hand and the terrifying strength of 19 dragons, Yi Shiwen had completely pressed him down. But Chu Sun was still unwilling to accept this result where he might get defeated by a Xiantian first stage master like Yi Shiwen. Finally, Chu Sun's hands had completely numbed, and he couldn't block the relentless attacks of Yi Shiwen and was sent flying out while screaming, "Dash!" Chapter 86, NT. Thanks to Amarija Andrews, U.S., and Suvin Chantha, U.S., for sponsoring Chapter 86. This is the second chapter of the Saturday's grand release. 3 more to come. Chapter 86. You all can come together. Everyone was shocked watching this scene, because no one was able to see the depth of Yi Zaiwen's true strength. The stronger his enemy was, the stronger he would become accordingly. Earlier, his battle with Huacheng, and now with Chu Sun. Each time, his strength would grow, which was very shocking for everyone. It was as if his strength was truly unfathomable. Yi Shiwen looked coldly at Chu Sun. Although this guy was conceited and very arrogant, but there was a valid reason behind his arrogance, as he was at the peak of Xiantian's second stage, and his strength was indeed sufficient enough to be ranked among the top row of the disciples. Yi Shiwen almost could not waste his cultivation, because just when he had shot his palm towards Chu Sun, his intention had been detected by Chu Sun, who then blocked Yi Zaiwen's palm and slightly deflected it. Yi Shiwen, accept our challenge. Yi Shiwen was still thinking about this matter when suddenly he heard 3 loud voices challenging him. Yi Shiwen looked up and actually saw that 3 similar wretched-looking fat people had jumped out of the crowd. Shameless! The 3 of you are taking advantage of him, who has just finished fighting a battle. These 3 are the infamous Zhongshe 3 brothers from Qingqing Sub-School. So they are the Zhongshe 3 brothers. Ah, and no wonder they are too outrageous. After coming to the main sect, it didn't take long for the Zhongshe 3 brothers to gain quite a reputation, and of course, this reputation was not a good one. These 3 brothers were really shameless. Yi Shiwen also knew about the Zhongshe 3 brothers, and could only sigh. So, do you dare to accept our challenge? The eldest of the 3 Zhongshe brothers challenged Yi Shiwen in a provocative manner. In spite of facing criticism from the crowd, 3 Zhongshe brothers were not willing to give up. Now that Yi Shiwen had already defeated Chu Sun, they were aiming at defeating the exhausted Yi Shiwen and gain instant fame. As to how shameless this act was, they didn't care. On the contrary, they were very complacent from this. They only considered it as their praise. Yes, if you don't want to accept our challenge, then simply throw in the towel, and we will walk away. The second Zone brother said in a provocative tone. Well, brother, I think he has got no guts. The youngest Zone brother pretended to be cool and said, shameless. Behind Yi Shiwen, Yi Rushua frowned and said. She was very mad at them, as this act was no different from taking advantage of someone else. Initially, they did not dare to stand up on their own against Yi Shiwen, and now that he was exhausted after a battle, they were trying to provoke him by implying that he was a coward. In her view, it was really shameless. Other disciples of Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School were also glaring and giving angry looks to the 3 brothers because this was simply too outrageous. While other disciples of different sub-schools were also looking at the 3 brothers with a look of disdain in their eyes and were cursing them for this shameless act. All eyes were fixated on Yi Shiwen, waiting how he would answer. The stern-looking Yi Shiwen suddenly chuckled and said, You can certainly challenge me, and I am always ready to take on people like you any day. NT. Author has used a Malago, which means any Tom, Dick, or Harry. What? You dare look down on us 3 brothers? The second brother said in an angry voice. If you want to challenge me, you will have to bet 100 spirit stones, and if lost, no money returns. Yi Shiwen indifferently said. When the three Zhongshe brothers heard this, they froze for a moment because they never expected that Yi Shiwen would actually put forward such a condition. One must know that 100 spirit stones was a big amount for an ordinary Xiantian master. But Zhong Boss nodded and said, "All right." In his view, as long as they beat Yi Shiwen, they would not lose anything. He didn't want to delay the fight even for 1 minute, because Yi Shiwen might recover from his exhaustion, which would naturally be very unfavorable to them. The three Zhongshe brothers immediately agreed to the terms of battle. These three brothers really were so shameless, but this time they had probably miscalculated by thinking that they could easily bully Yi Shiwen. "All three of you can come together," Yi Shiwen said. "What did you just say?" The Zone boss said, but since they did not have any sense of shame, they would of course take this chance to work together and defeat Yi Shiwen. Boom! The three Zhongshe brothers, with their huge statures and inconsistent speeds, instantly rushed towards Yi Shiwen. The overall strength of the three Zhongshe brothers was quite high, and they actually were the masters of Xiantian's second stage, and their boss had transformed 40% Xiantian Jinqi and was already at the peak of Xiantian's second stage, although he was not as strong as Chu Sun, but the difference between them was not very wide. All three of them together smacked their fists with their combined strength, actually somewhat stronger than that of Chu Sun. Many spectating disciples, without uttering a single word, were anxiously watching the fight. Bang! 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 Yi Zaiwen's arm instantly blurred and blocked their joint attack. Soon, they felt as if they had collided with an iron wall. They had originally expected that Yi Shiwen had already exhausted his Jinqi, because if they had teamed up to fight against Chu Sun, they would definitely have exhausted themselves. But from the appearance of Yi Shiwen, neither his complexion was red due to fatigue, nor did he look exhausted even after fighting a fierce battle with Chu Sun. This had made them to secretly complain in their hearts at their decision to fight Yi Shiwen. But Yi Shiwen did not give them any chance of respite. Bang! Yi Shiwen used his one hand to catch a punch from the youngest brother, followed by using another hand. He instantly punched him. Kara! With a crisp sound of breaking bones, the youngest Zong brother's hand was instantly broken by Yi Zaiwen's punch. Yi Shiwen then lifted one foot and shot a lightning-fast kick covered with a terrifying Jinqi and shoved directly into the belly of the youngest brother. He screamed again, and his stout body was instantly sent flying out and severely fell on the ground, and he fainted. Third brother! The second Zong brother roared and rushed towards Yi Shiwen, but then he also walked on his brother's footsteps. Yi Shiwen severely blasted his palm on his chest, using the move Leveling Storm 4 strokes, which fractured his ribs, and he spat a mouthful of blood and fell upside down on the ground. When their boss saw that the two brothers had been blasted away by Yi Shiwen, he quickly shouted, "I will," but he couldn't finish the sentence, as in a flash, Yi Zaiwen's overwhelming punch blasted. Boom! Yi Zaiwen's punch blasted away the zone boss, and his body severely hit on the side of a tree, and he fell unconscious. Chapter 87. NT. Thanks to Suvanchantha, US, for sponsoring Chapters 87. This is the third chapter of Saturday's grand release. 2 more to come. Chapter 87. Yi Shiwen. Come Out. Bingdao Subschool's courtyard was located among the courtyards of the 3 major subcases. With an ice-cold look on his face, Chu Sun was standing outside, occasionally looking towards the room inside the courtyard. Beside him stood a blue-robed youth with a dignified appearance and smile on his face. He looked at Chu Sun and said, "I heard that you were defeated by a country bumpkin." Chu Sun shot a cold glance at him. This blue-robed youth was called Gong Yao, and like Chu Sun, he was also one of top disciples of Bingdao Subschool, even stronger compared to him. Gee, this news has spread everywhere and has turned us into a laughingstock, and now people are laughing at our Bingdao Subschool. Our reputation has been thoroughly discredited. Do you want to sell us? Gong Yao laughed and said, "This is not something you should joke about." Chu Sun said in a cold voice, "I will do something about it myself." "You can't do it yourself." Gong Yao smiled and said, "Because recently I've heard that in the last 3 days, 30 people challenged him and no one could defeat him." After Yi Shiwen had defeated Chu Sun and the three Zhongshe brothers soon, a lot of disciples had been attracted to come and challenge Yi Shiwen, hoping to beat him and earning fame in the process. For now, do not look for any trouble with Yi Shiwen. At this time, the door opened and came out a man with an appearance of more than 20 years old and an ice-cold facial expression, even more than Chu Sun's usual cold look. He was wearing dark blue clothes, tall stature, and possessed an overbearing aura. Why? Chu Sun asked without trying to be disrespectful in front of that man, because he was strongest of this year's disciples from Bingdao Subschool, Shangguan Xuani, with an unfathomable cultivation and was ranked among the top 3 players from all the subschools. Assessment examination will be held in 2 days, so do not complicate the situation. Shangguan Xuani said in an indifferent voice, "Everyone's watching our actions, moreover, you may not be his match. Later, we will take our time and deal with him. Make a full preparation and perform outstandingly in the assessment. Understood?" Yes. In just 3 days of harvest, Yi Zaiwen's inventory now had 3,000 spirit stones. All of a sudden, gaining this many spirit stones was simply unimaginable even for the masters of Xiantian 4th or 5th stage. Because Yi Shiwen had defeated Chu Sun and Zhongshe 3 brothers, he had become part of many rumors, and his fame had become comparable to that of the well-known figures. Chu Sun was undoubtedly one of strongest top disciples of Bingdao Major Subschool, and although the 3 Zhongshe brothers were very shameless, but a lot of people could not help but admit that they were very powerful. Especially when the 3 of them fought together, their total strength would be more than that of common top disciples. Among the disciples of these subschools, there were some so-called seed disciples. These seed disciples were the strongest in every respect and existed in each social stratum of disciples. There were seed disciples present among the outer disciples, inner disciples, and core disciples as well. Seed disciples were the most formidable group of people, and the subschools would cultivate these seed disciples. Chu Sun and Zhongshe 3 brothers were also the seed disciples. Yi Shiwen had previously defeated Wen Shiyang, but he was only a quasi-seed disciple, so defeating him was nothing compared to defeating Chun Sun and Zhongshe brothers. There were countless famous disciples who wanted to challenge Yi Shiwen, but how could Yi Shiwen just accept so many challenges? So Yi Shiwen had set some rules. If they wanted to challenge him, they must hand over 100 spirit stones, otherwise they won't get a chance to fight him. Also, each day, he would accept challenges from not more than 10 people. This would directly eliminate those who just wanted to be famous but had no strength or money to challenge. So in just 3 days, Yi Zaiwen's total stock of spirit stones had suddenly gone up to more than 3,000 spirit stones. One could say that Yi Shiwen had suddenly become rich, because even for a seed disciple like Chu Sun and other seeds disciples, 100 spirit stones were close to their net worth. Not to mention, for the ordinary disciples, especially those who had just entered into the Xiantian realm, having 10 spirit stones was not bad. Among the challengers during this period, there were some seeds disciples as well, some of whom were even more powerful than Chu Sun, and it was very tough for Yi Shiwen to defeat them. But Yi Shiwen had a great harvest because these seeds disciples were very powerful, with each having his own trump skill, and it was very difficult to deal with each of them, which was again a major harvest for Yi Zaiwen's battle experience. And after fighting with these strong people, Yi Zaiwen's various martial arts had been greatly tempered, and he had become even more skilled at using them in fights. Now, everyone was aware of the fact that in the Qingfeng Mountain Subschool, there was such an outstanding figure. Yi Shiwen naturally had gained a rank among the top seed disciples, and almost everyone among the subschool disciples had recognized his terrifying monstrous strength. Even if they hated it, they had to admit it. Yi Shiwen had been able to feel a huge power surging in his body, and he felt as if he was standing on the threshold of a breakthrough which could happen at any time, and then he would finally break through to next stage and become a Xiantian 2nd stage master. Once he entered into the Xiantian 2nd stage, his strength would immediately have a rapid progress, and by that time, he would be able to contend with the elite masters, who were at the peak of Xiantian 3rd stage and possessed 60% transformed Xiantian Jinqi. Now Yi Shiwen had enough spirit stones to support him through his breakthrough without any problem. So long as there were enough spirit stones, Having a breakthrough would never be difficult for him. After entering into the main sect, the competition pressure had become greater. Boom! A majestic aura suddenly burst out in the courtyard of the Qingfeng Mountain Subschool and quickly spread in the surrounding area. It was a breakthrough into the Xiantian realm. There was a look of surprise on Yi Zaiwen's face, because this time, the only person in the Qingfeng Mountain Subschool who could have a breakthrough into the Xiantian realm was his sister, Yi Ruxue. While Yi Shiwen was playing around outside with the challengers, Yi Ruxue had decided not to come out until her closed-door training would finish, and she would break into the Xiantian realm. Yi Shiwen was about to rush inside the courtyard and congratulate Yi Ruxue, and when suddenly, a hoarse roar resounded throughout the sky. Yi Shiwen, come out! Chapter 88. NT. Thanks to Suvinchantha, US, for sponsoring Chapter 88. This is the fourth chapter of Saturday's grand release. One more to come. Chapter 88. Xiaoyang elder Yi Shiwen was about to rush inside the courtyard and congratulate Yi Ruxue, when suddenly, a hoarse roar resounded throughout the sky. Yi Shiwen, come out! The roar was instantly followed by a terrifying coercive aura which pressed down toward the courtyard. This pressure was so terrifying and sudden that it took Yi Shiwen by surprise and overwhelmed him. Who? Yi Shiwen shouted along with his Xiantian Zhenqi rolling out to confront that coercive aura. The collision between both of their Zhenqi directly produced a windstorm. But it was obvious that Yi Zaiwen's Xiantian Zhenqi was not a match for the incredible Zhenqi released by the other party, which came down all the way and completely crushed Yi Zaiwen's Zhenqi. Xiantian Zhenyuan. An astonished look flashed in Yi Zaiwen's eyes, because this visitor was definitely not one of the disciples who had come to challenge him, as only the masters of Xiantian 6th stage or above could possess Xiantian Zhenyuan. When a Xiantian master would reach the peak of the Xiantian 5th stage, he would have transformed 100% of his Hodian Zhenqi into Xiantian Zhenqi. At that time, if he would want to break into the Xiantian 6th stage, then it would occur only after a metamorphosis, when the Xiantian Zhenqi would start transforming into Xiantian Zhenyuan, which was considered the second metamorphosis of life. Once the transformation was successful, the life expectancy from the original 200 years would also increase to more than 500 years. Xiantian 6th stage masters were a lot more powerful compared to the masters of Xiantian 5th stage, and only 1 in a dozen was able to have a qualitative change in their Zhenqi, which was necessary to step into the Xiantian 6th stage. Yuan School main sect also classified this as a standard of division, where masters of Xiantian 6th stage or above could become core disciples, and those below 6th stage could only become inner disciples. Although the difference was of only a single stage, but there was a difference of heaven and earth between the treatments of masters on these stages. Most of the elders were masters of Xiantian 6th stage who were originally the core disciples, with many of them reaching the deadline age of nearly 500 years, trying to break through to the Zhendao realm. Since these core disciples had been unable to reach Zhendao realm, so they had decided to become elders for the subschools. But even so, all these elders were scary existences and were far stronger than ordinary disciples. Who are you? Yi Shiwen came out of the courtyard and was surprised to find an old man, clad in black clothes, glaring angrily at him. Right at that time, Zhang Yang, Yi Feng, and Yi Ruxue, who had just broken through to the Xiantian realm, had all come out as well. Are you Yi Shiwen? The old man asked in a cold voice with an angry look on his face. I am, Yi Shiwen said. You little beast, you dared to injure the seed disciples of our Xiaoyang subschool. The black-clothed old man said in a cold voice. Who are you calling little beast? Yi Shiwen asked. Damn you, you little bastard, that black-clothed old man blurted out with his face flushed red with anger. Ha ha ha! The disciples of the Qingfeng Mountain Subschool gave out an unbridled laughter. They had quickly understood that this black-clothed old man was an elder of Xiaoyang Subschool. Even if he was an elder, but he belonged to the side of their sworn enemy, which was not going to change at this point of time, as the enmity between the two sides had extended for so many years. The elder was certainly furious because Yi Shiwen had severely injured Huacheng, and there was no way for them to participate in the assessment. That was the reason why he had come, to punish Yi Shiwen. "You little beast, I will kill you." The black-clothed old man angrily tossed his sleeves, and suddenly the air around him completely distorted. A big hand instantly congealed in the air, made up of the Xiantian Jinyuan, and for a master of Xiantian 6th stage, this method of directly using the Xiantian Jinyuan was very useful. Clang! Yi Shiwen took out the long blade from the scabbard on his back and released a bright blade light, which instantly filled the sky. At the moment, the appearance of Yi Shiwen was shining like a god of war, with a solemn look on his face and his black hair swinging violently in the wind. The sword light completely transformed into a sharp blade made up of condensed Xiantian Jinqi, which immediately rushed towards that big hand and chopped down. ZZZZ. The tip of the blade chopped down on the big hand, issuing a loud ZZZZ sound, followed by evolving the live picture of the creative concept of Missing Moon Beheader. As the creative concept of Missing Moon Beheader evolved out, it temporarily blocked the big hand by continuously regrouping the Xiantian Jinqi and chopping down again and again on the big hand. Creative concept? How is this possible? He has actually evolved out a creative concept. The black-clothed old man looked unbelievably at Yi Shiwen, because he could not believe that Yi Shiwen had already evolved out a creative concept, which was difficult to obtain, even for the inner disciples of the main sect. But even so, if he was not such an evildoer, then how could he have easily beaten the geniuses of his subschool? Having thought of this, his eyes flashed with a killing intent. Such an evildoer genius. It was necessary to strangle him before he became hostile towards his subschool, and if allowed to grow up, it would certainly not be a good thing for Xiaoyang's subschool. Even if this time, he might put his Xiaoyang's subschool in the danger of getting punished, he must strangle the danger in the cradle. In the sky, a descending moon intensely collided with the big hand, which caused terrifying air explosions, sending layer by layer ripples of air waves in all directions. The pressure was increasing on Yi Ziwen's body, while his blade had fiercely collided with the big hand, but even after displaying the full essence of the creative concept of his blade technique, he had still been unable to block the incoming attack. Yi Shiwen had been forced down by the virtue of superior strength of the old man. Yi Shiwen was soon pressed down, and his bones started to make crackling sound. His skeleton was facing an intense friction, although his body was insanely tough, just as strong as the steel, but when put under such a kind of terrifying coercion, it seemed as if his body would explode any time. "Old man, what are you doing?" Yi Shiwen gritted his teeth and shouted in a voice filled with anger. This old guy was definitely not holding back, and it seemed as if he was going to kill Yi Shiwen right there, right then. That black clothes simply ignored Yi Shiwen, and his big hand pressed down while fully destroying the live picture of creative concept. "Old man, in the future, I will certainly return the favor for today." Yi Shiwen gritted his teeth and said with a lot of sweat crazily dripping down his face. 10 years, in just 10 years, he would be able to easily crush this old guy, but right now his strength was not enough. This was the first time that Yi Shiwen had thoroughly felt so helpless, craving for strength. He just needed enough strength so that a day like this would never come again where he would feel so helpless. Dash. Chapter 89. NT. Thanks to Suvanchantha, US, for sponsoring Chapters 89. This is the fifth and final chapter of Saturday's grand release. With this, I conclude Saturday's grand release. Look forward to one more grand release on Sunday. Enjoy. Chapter 89. Mighty Lin Zhantian, Old Man. In the future, I will certainly return the favor for today. Yi Shiwen gritted his teeth and said with a lot of sweat crazily dipping down his face. "You do not have a future," the old man shouted with a hideous look on his face. "Stop!" A loud shout came, followed by a big hand that came straight down from the sky and caught that old man's big hand and directly exploded it. "What were you trying to do?" A thundering voice resounded in the sky, and a figure came down flying. This was none other than Qingfeng Mountain Subschool's former ancestor, Lin Zhantian. The black-clothed old man looked coldly at Lin Zhantian. This little beast has severely injured the seed disciples of our Shaoyang sub-school, and there's no way for our school to participate in the assessment. This hatred is totally irreconcilable. That old man said and gritted his teeth. Bullshit! Yi Xuan gasped for breath, then said, it was them who first came to bully the disciples of our sub-school and were forcefully trying to occupy our courtyard. They even injured my brother and were going to cripple him. They went too far, and I was just returning the favor, but I was merciful and did not waste their martial arts. Little bastard you, the black-clothed old man cursed, but it was not that he did not know the ins and outs of whole matter. He was just trying to take advantage of the fact that Lin Zhantian had not come back yet. And this was the best opportunity to take revenge on Yi Xuan and settle things once and for all. But things didn't go as he had planned after the intervention of Lin Zhantian. Get out of here! Lin Zhantian thundered loudly and waved his big sleeves. Almost instantly, a terrifying force arrived in front of the black-clothed old man. Poof! The black-clothed old man spurted out a mouthful of blood, and his skinny body was sent flying upside down. Only one hit had seriously injured him, and he was stunned, staring at the Lin Zhantian, because he never thought that Lin Zhantian could actually be so strong. Zhen Dao, black-clothed old man muttered while glaring at Lin Zhantian with his fierce eyes. He said, Lin Zhantian, you'll regret it. Get lost. No one dares to touch my disciples. Lin Zhantian said in a strong voice. He had clearly demonstrated the strength of the Zhen Dao. The disciples of the Zhen Dao realm were called true disciples. Compared to them, the core disciples could only be considered mid-level personnel, but true disciples were considered at the top. In a major sect like Yuan School main sect, only few hundred true disciples were present, but the added count of core disciples and inner disciples together was almost 100,000. The gap between the positions of these two parties could be seen just from the numbers. The black-clothed old man looked bitterly at Lin Zhantian. No doubt, if they were not in the premises of the main sect, he would have been directly beheaded by Lin Zhantian. The competition among the sub-schools was allowed as long as there were no direct fights between the factions. From the perspective of the main sect, as long as the whole martial arts community was flourishing inside the school, competition was permitted. The black-clothed old man looked towards the disciples of Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School and bitterly left. Let's go inside, Lin Zhantian said. After the return of Lin Zhantian, it seemed as if the Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School had suddenly gained back its backbone, and the disciples followed him inside, happy expressions on their faces. After hearing about all the events that had occurred during his absence, Lin Zhantian smiled and looked at Yi Xuan, then said, Good. Well done. You are the power and prestige of our Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School. Lin Zhantian was also surprised in his heart, because this was quite unexpected, although he had always been very optimistic about Yi Xuan, but did not expect that he would actually be able to become so strong that not even the seed disciples would be his match. Those seed disciples were considered elite among the elites and were generally very powerful, but had been surprisingly defeated by Yi Xuan. Lin Zhantian was overjoyed with these turn of events. In my absence, all of you have done very well, Lin Zhantian said. Thanks, Ancestor, for your praise. Everyone said in unison. Now, I will tell you about the reason behind the sudden departure of all the elders, although this is a major affair, but I think it is necessary for all of you to know about it. Lin Zhantian said. The looks of all the disciples suddenly became serious, because they knew that a matter which was major for Lin Zhantian could never be trivial. This thing is slightly strange. For the triennial assessment examination, all of the sub-schools send their respective elite disciples. But this time, actually disciples of more than 30 sub-schools were attacked, out of which disciples from 6 sub-schools were completely annihilated and not even their skeletons could be found. Lin Zhantian said with a solemn look on his face. Everyone present there held their breaths. Though these sub-schools were just Yuan School sub-schools and relative to the main sect, their strength was not much, but compared to other sects, it was still very large. But these were the elite disciples of various sub-schools. Not to mention, they were also being accompanied by a few elders, and these elders were super experts of Xiantian 5th stage or more. How could they dare to touch such a team? But to be able to completely annihilate such a team of experts, this was not possible for ordinary forces. In the past, there have been cases when disciples were attacked, but they were all isolated phenomenon or vendetta. But this time, it is not unusual that out of a total of over 100 subschools, more than 30 subschools have been attacked. Lin Zhantian said, "This thing has caused the sect to have a high degree of attention to this matter because there may be large hostile forces after our disciples. The sect has sent many experts to investigate about this matter. The reason of sharing this thing with you is because soon you will enter the main sect. After that, you need to be very careful." Lin Zhantian said, participating in the assessment was especially important for subschools because it would get easier for their disciples to be directly promoted to become the inner disciples or core disciples in the main sect. Naturally, those who performed outstandingly in the assessment would get more popular and would be able to get more resources for their respective subschools. This was the reason why the elder of Shaoyang's subschool was so frantic. "Yes," everyone said in unison. Sunday, I announced the grand release of 3 to 5 sponsored chapters on Sunday. I decided to organize this grand release to compensate for the lost sponsored chapters this week. Let's see if I can reach my target of releasing up to chapter 93 by Sunday. Monday, any sponsored chapters one couldn't release on Sunday will come on Monday, along with Sunday's regular chapter 95 and Monday's regular chapter 96, raised so far $150, 500%. Queue is cleared for sponsored chapters 90, 91, 92, 93, and 94. Thanks again to Suvin Chantha, U.S., for sponsoring chapters 87, 88, 89, 90, 91, and 92. Thanks to Jeffrey Demonier, France, for sponsoring chapter 93. Thanks to Thomas Metzger, U.S., and Corey Sagawa, U.S., for sponsoring chapter 94. Chapter 90? And T. Damn, I don't think I will be able to reach my target of releasing up to chapter 93 by Sunday. Stuff came up and I was a lot busier today, so today's grand release will contain only chapters 90, 91, and 92. You will get yet another grand release of chapters 93, 94, 95, and 96 on Monday. And after that, one more grand release on Tuesday of sponsored chapters 97, 98, 99, and 100. I don't plan to stop these grand releases until I release chapter 100. Enjoy! And T. Thanks to Suvin Chantha, U.S., for sponsoring chapter 90. Chapter 90. Assessment begins. Lin Zhantian undoubtedly had cast a shadow of an unknown enemy in the hearts of the disciples of Qingfeng Mountain Subschool, but they were not too worried about it. After all, they were too keen to enter into the main sect. Everyone's thoughts were fully focused on the assessment examination, which was going to take place a few days later. Although it was not supposed to be difficult, and basically everyone could pass, but this assessment was directly related to their future treatments and positions in the sect. Those who performed outstandingly could earn a lot of rewards. Yi Shiwen was only a little worried in his heart about the future. After all, there were some powerful hostile forces lurking out there, so all of them needed to be careful in future. But he didn't think about this matter for too long because it was a thing in the future, and right now, the most important matter was to perform well in the assessment. Time passed day by day, and 3 days had quickly passed. It was time to finally participate in the assessment examination. Early in the morning, all of the Qingfeng Mountain's disciples got up early and assembled in the courtyard entrance. Lin Zhantian looked at the crowd and said, "Today we're going to the Full Moon Peak." Full Moon Peak was one of the 10 main peaks of Yi Yuan School and was home to the leaders of the Vain disciples who were the direct descendants of Yi Yuan School's inheritance and held the direct command over the doctrines of the school. For ages, these leaders would generally come from the Full Moon Peak. Everyone was excited because they all wanted to be able to join the Full Moon Peak, as the disciples of Full Moon Peak were considered as the most noble and honorable. But whether they would be able to enter into the Full Moon Peak depended on their performance during the assessment examination. This assessment will be conducted on the Full Moon Peak. Lin Zhantian said, "The ancient masters of the Yi Yuan School came forth in large numbers to create many small worlds. This time, we are going to a small world located on the Full Moon Peak called Huama Territory. This small world was created when an ancestor from previous generations of Yuan school used his extraordinary magical powers to open the many spaces from the devil world and captured a lot of Huanma, and again used his magical powers to open up this small world. Huanma was a low-level devil and was good at using magic to confuse the people, but even if it was at the lowest level among the devils, but also very tough. Yi Shiwen had read about them in some records, but in those records, Devil World was treated just as a kind of myth and looked like an ancient mythology, but here he actually heard that devils were real. Although it's only a small world, but it is 100 times larger than our Qingfeng Mountain Subschool's Blood Yuan territory. Lin Zhantian said, "Here, the danger is also higher, but this small world's most important characteristic is its transformation between real and imaginary world. Even if someone dies inside this world, he wouldn't actually die and will be sent out immediately, but the things you all will see inside are deemed to be true. Other than this feature of no one dying inside this world, the rest is similar to other small worlds. The disciples of Qingfeng Mountain Subschool were in uproar because if that was the case, then they really did not need to worry. They could just go all out, but at the same time, the competition would become more intense because everyone would have no scruples as they knew that they wouldn't die no matter what. This is a protective measure to protect the newly arrived disciples." Lin Zhantian said, "But you shouldn't think that you will not die. Those Huama are not humans, and they are very good at mind control magic. Some people got their minds controlled by Huanma, and those creatures attached themselves onto the body of these people, and they have since become their puppets." All of the disciples trembled in fear, because if that was the case, then it was really too scary. People could become zombies after being controlled by those Huanma, and after that, even if they survived, it would be worse than death. In the past, such a thing has happened when some of the disciples were being controlled and no one knew about it, and it had nearly caused a calamity. I am telling all of this to remind you to always pay attention to your surroundings and be careful at all times. Lin Zhantian said, "The assessment requirements are very simple. So long as each of you kills one Huanma, you can pass." Lin Zhantian said, "This assessment will be observed by many high-level personnel of the sect. So if you give a splendid performance, then you may get directly chosen by them in their veins. Therefore, do your best and perform well." "We promise," the disciples said in unison. Although even the weakest Huanma was at the Hodian 9th stage, but these disciples were all at the Hodian 9th stage or above and could easily handle a low-level devil like Huanma. Huanma were more formidable in the spiritual influence and mind control. Especially those with weak minds were most vulnerable, but these were the elite disciples with strong minds. Otherwise, how could they have gained a high-level cultivation at such a young age? So as long as they were careful, it would not be too difficult to deal with Huanma. So, all of the disciples were confident, because anyway they want die, and could display their full strengths. Unless they had an extreme bad luck, there won't be any other problems. Lin Zhantian called the several demon birds, and everyone jumped up. In total, there were 20 or so individuals participating from the Qingfeng Mountain Subschool. You won't die during this assessment, but I hope that you will still be very cautious. This assessment is not too difficult, but the emphasis doesn't lie on just passing the examination, but in getting better results. If you fail abruptly, then it is equivalent to missing a golden opportunity. Understood? Lin Zhantian did not forget to teach them even from over the demon bird. Yes. The disciples nodded and said, "Even after entering the main sect, you will still always be the vain disciples of my Qingfeng Mountain Subschool. The seal of Qingfeng Mountain has been long branded on your persona, so I hope you will have heartfelt solidarity, and you will also show your support in the future." Lin Zhantian. From among these disciples, those who would become famous would also become a huge support for the Qingfeng Mountain Subschool in the future. Yes, the disciples said in unison. While everyone was excited and gossiping about the assessment, the demon birds had already flown over several mountains to enter into the outer boundaries of Yuan School. The inside of the Yuan School was very lively and bustling with people, and there was actually a city located in the hillside of the mountain peaks, showing the liveliness of Yuan School's main sect. Chapter 91, T. I am still working on Chapter 92. So for now, enjoy reading Chapter 91 Grinning Face. Thanks to Suvanchantha, U.S., for sponsoring Chapter 91. Chapter 91. The gathering of geniuses within the premises of Yuan School main sect. One could see demon birds flying everywhere, carrying the disciples. The crowd of Qingfeng Mountain Subschool responded with curiosity in their eyes, looking excitingly at this scene. But soon, the demon birds flew towards the foot of the full moon mountain peak. Only the elders and true disciples were allowed to fly over the full moon peak, and others could only go up from the foot of the mountain. Lin Zhantian did not go with them, but directly jumped off from his demon bird and vanished in front of everyone. Everyone went towards the plaza of Full Moon Peak, where disciples from over 100 subschools were arriving one after another. Over 100 subschools, even if each subschool had only a few dozens of people, but after adding them up, the total number would go up to thousands of people. The good thing was that the plaza was very wide, and at the moment, it was filled with many shadows. These were the masters of the Hotian ninth stage, who were once the core disciples of their respective subschools. This gathering was truly magnificent and spectacular, far more than the gathering of competitions held at various subschools. And, of course, compared to the geniuses present in the gathering for the competitions, the quality of talent here was undoubtedly much higher. Each of these subschools had elite disciples, and all of them had dignified appearance, especially the Xiantian-level disciples. All of them were upright and very conceited. After all, they had already entered into the Xiantian realm before joining the main sect. To be able to become a Xiantian master was an incredible achievement for the subschool disciples, and they were considered elite among the elites. Yi Ruxue was the latest addition to the group of Xiantian masters of the Qingfeng Mountain subschools. Including her, now there were a total of 4 Xiantian masters, which was an unforeseen achievement in the history of Qingfeng Mountain subschool. Although there were a lot of strong opponents with many strong subschools, but some subschools were quite miserable with only a single Xiantian master. With over 100 subschools arrived for the assessment, the strength of each subschools was not the same. The strength of some was almost comparable to the 3 major subschools. It's truly spectacular. Wu Hao sighed with emotion and said, now these disciples had truly realized that their own road to practice in the main sect was finally going to begin, and that there were several stronger people in the world. This scenery was going to encourage their unceasing progress. At this time, Yi Shiwen saw the people of 3 major subschools standing in front. Standing on the left were the people of Bingdao subschool, led by a man with an extraordinary temperament. Yi Shiwen did not know, but this guy was the well-known Shangguan Xuani, one of the strongest 3 disciples of this year, with an unfathomable strength. Next to the group of Bingdao subschool was also a large group of people with each one of their disciples in the Xiantian realm. The group belonged to one of the 3 major subschools, Shenhuashan subschool. It was located in the southern part of the state, next to a volcano, and its disciples practice fire attribute power techniques, making them a stark contrast with the disciples of Bingdao subschool. NT. Shenhuashan subschool can also be called Divine Volcano subschool. These 2 subschools had always been consistent rivals thanks to their ranks as one of the major subschools and also the opposing nature of their power techniques. In short, these 2 subschools were inherently hostile towards each other and also held mutual hatred. In front of the group of Divine Volcano subschool, there was a man standing proudly with an appearance of approximately 25-year-old. He was an abnormally burly man, and Yi Shiwen found out that this man was named Yan Qiliang. Similar to Shangguan Xuani, he also had an unfathomable strength. On the other side of the group of Divine Volcano subschool, the group of 3rd major subschool was standing. This group belonged to the Yunnu subschool. As the name suggested, all the disciples in this major subschool were females. The group consisted of many beautiful young female students, and all of them looked very attractive, and they had also grabbed the attraction of most of the male disciples. NT. Yunnu subschool can also be called Jade Lady subschool. Their leader looked roughly 18 to 19-year-old, dressed in yellow clothes flapping in the wind, long hair, and had a delicate jade-like skin. 2 strands of hair, were gently flowing by the wind over her cheeks, which were complementing her seductive appearance even more. This was the genius female disciple of Jade Lady Subschool and was named Zhongsun Yuan. It was said that few years ago, she had easily stepped into the Xiantian realm, and no one knew what her cultivation level was now. Zhongsun Yuan, Yin Qiliang, and Shangguan Xuani were said to be the three strongest disciples of this year, and each of them had unfathomable strength. Although other disciples would have to wait as they did not know which vein they might join, but that was not the case for the disciples of Jade Lady Subschool because it was already fixed for them. Jade Lady Subschool was a subsidiary of Yuan School's Jade Lady Mountain Peak, so all the disciples were going to join the Jade Lady Mountain Peak in the future. And the reason was that Jade Lady Mountain Peak only accepted female disciples, while Jade Lady Subschool had been established by a previous senior of Jade Lady Mountain Peak. So it was only obvious for the disciples of the Jade Lady Subschool to join Jade Lady Mountain Peak. So relatively speaking, they didn't need to participate in this assessment. In addition to these three subschools, there were some other first-class subschools having more than 10 disciples who had already entered into the Xiantian realm. And then there were middle-level subschools like Qingfeng Mountain Subschool. Lastly, there were subschools with only 1 or 2 sub-Xiantian masters. In this world, where strength was the supreme law and truth, only strong could command respect. Zhongsun Yuan is just like an angel. She is the not only beautiful, but is also this year's strongest disciple of Jade Lady Subschool. I heard that it has already been decided that she is going to be the leader of the disciples at Jade Lady Mountain Peak and will also become the senior of the Mountain Peak someday. No wonder. It's really extraordinary how Jade Lady Subschool accepts only female disciples and turns them into such strong masters. Shangguan Xuani, Yin Qiliang, and Zhongsun Yuan are this year's strongest among all of us, and no one even knows what their true strengths are. I have heard from some people that the three of them are already at the peak of Xiantian 3rd stage, or may even have reached the Xiantian 4th stage. When the disciples standing in the surrounding heard this, they could help but hold their breaths. Peak of Xiantian 3rd stage or Xiantian 4th stage. To them, masters of such strengths were simply godlike existences. Sunday, Chapter 92 in few hours. And yes, I couldn't reach my target of releasing up to Chapter 93 by Sunday. Monday, sponsored Chapters 93 and 94 will come along with Sunday's regular Chapter 95 and Monday's regular Chapter 96 raised so far. $90, 300%. Queue is cleared for sponsored Chapters 92, 93, and 94. Chapter 92. NT. Thanks to Suvinchantha, U.S., for sponsoring Chapter 92. Chapter 92. See you later. While Minghan, perhaps this level of strength was not too conspicuous in the main sect, but for many subschools, it was already very scary. All of these disciples were undoubtedly very talented, and after entering into the main sect, they would start to cultivate vigorously. In the future, they would most likely enter into the Zhendao realm and become true disciples. Peak of Xiantian 3rd stage. Yi Shiwen turned again to look at the three strongest disciples and noticed that they were probably only a step away from reaching the Xiantian 4th stage, and right now, he was not a match for any of them. But Yi Shiwen was not worried about these three geniuses because he was confident that he would eventually be able to catch up with them. Junior Sister Apprentice, take a look. These are this year's disciples. Yi Zaiwen's eyes were closed when suddenly a loud voice reached his ears. Accompanied with the sound of flapping wings, 2 demon birds flew down from the sky. On top of a large eagle stood a man with an appearance of about 27-year-old, clad in traditional Chinese clothes, dancing in the wind, and there was a smile on his face. The other bird was Snow White Crane, carrying a black-clothed, beautiful woman who had a pair of black, curved eyebrows and pure white skin. Looking at her, it seemed as if a celestial beauty had just descended into the mortal world. Everyone's eyes were attracted to both of them. Even Yi Shiwen was no exception, but his eyes were not on the man, but on the woman atop the crane. Huaminghan! Yi Shiwen was determined that this was definitely the girl he had rescued in the cave. Compared to the slightly awkward girl he had seen last time, This time when he saw Hua Minghan, she was really like a fairy having an unparalleled grace and elegance. Her appearance was truly pleasing to the eyes. Hua Minghan seemed to have noticed Yi Xiwen's gaze and turned to look at him. After seeing Yi Xiwen, Hua Minghan was somewhat surprised as she did not expect to meet him so soon. Moreover, his current strength had really surprised her, because when the last time she had met him, he was only a Hautian realm master. Although while rescuing her, he had beheaded Luo Tian, but at that time, she had seriously injured Luo Tian. But now, Yi Xiwen had not just broken through to the Xiantian realm and was already at the peak of Xiantian first stage. Hua Minghan slowly descended from her crane, and step by step, walked towards Yi Xiwen while simply ignoring the Chinese rogue youth, who was constantly trying to talk to her. "You came," Hua Minghan said, and Yi Xiwen nodded. "I still haven't thanked you for the last time," Hua Minghan said, as she was in a hurry last time and had left without thanking him personally, which could be considered a very rude behavior. "It doesn't matter, that was as easy as lifting a hand." Yi Xiwen shook his head and said as he had benefited a lot from that incident and couldn't ask for more. Junior sister apprentice. At this time, the Chinese rogue youth also came over. "Who are you?" The Chinese rogue youth frowned and shouted in a low tone. He had instinctively felt some threat from Yi Xiwen. Seeing the youth questioning Yi Xiwen, Hua Minghan wrinkled her black eyebrow. But right then, Yi Xiwen said, "Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School, Yi Xiwen." Yi Xiwen could see arrogance and a look of disdain in the eyes of that Chinese rogue youth. The main sect disciples always looked down on the disciples from sub-schools as there was a huge difference between their strengths. But that Chinese rogue youth forced a smile on his face and said, "Hello, junior disciple. I'm Hu Yanghang, a core disciple." When Yi Xiwen heard that Hu Yanghang was a core disciple, adding to his arrogant tone, the meaning was clear that he was obviously pursuing Hua Minghan and was one of her suitors. And this was a method of warning him to stay away. Just like Hua Minghan, Yi Xiwen also neglected Hu Yanghang. He took out a phoenix-shaped jade pendant, then put it before Hua Minghan and said, "I give this jade rare treasure back to you." There was a shocked look in Hu Yanghang's eyes, and his gaze was continuously swinging between Hua Minghan and Yi Xiwen. How could he not know that this jade pendant was very precious to Hua Minghan, and she would never allow others to even take a look at it? And now, it actually appeared in the hands of Yi Xiwen. Exactly what had happened between the two of them, that Hua Minghan had actually given her precious jade pendant to someone else. Thinking of all sorts of possibilities, suddenly, Hu Yanghang looked at Yi Xiwen with a killing look flashing in his eyes. "Since you already have it, just keep it," Hua Minghan lightly said. "In comparison to what you did for me, this jade pendant is simply not enough." When many disciples standing around in the crowd have heard Hua Minghan, they could secretly make a guess that Yi Xiwen must have handled some major matter that had actually led to his friendship with this fairy. Yi Xiwen did not want to explain anything to anyone, as this secret belonged to the two of them, and he wanted to keep this thing a secret between just the two of them. "Assessment is about to start, I won't take your time anymore." After saying a few words to Yi Xiwen, she didn't stay there for too long and flew into the sky on her crane and soon disappeared from the eyes of everyone. When Hu Yanghang saw Hua Minghan leaving, he was also not in a mood to stay there. He first gave gloomy glances to Yi Xiwen, then mounted his eagle and left. After the two of them left, many disciples of various sub-schools started to give curious looks to Yi Xiwen because they didn't know how he had come to know a disciple from Full Moon Peak. Even Shangwan Xuani, Yin Qiliang, and Zhang Sun Yuan had turned back and were looking curiously at Yi Xiwen. Although they did not have to be specific, but anyone could make a guess that those two were definitely the disciples of Full Moon Peak, because except the true disciples and elder class people, as well as some characters with special permissions, only the disciples of this peak were allowed to fly over the Full Moon Peak. The people of Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School were especially very curious. They couldn't understand how Hua Minghan was on such friendly terms with Yi Xiwen, and it seemed that she owed him a great debt as well. Otherwise, why would she be willing to give her personal jade pendant to him? Although they did not know the specific effects of that jade pendant, but with just one look, anyone could see that the jade pendant was really extraordinary. Faced with so many curious gazes, Yi Xiwen directly closed his eyes. Yi Shiwen had killed Luo Tian and people of his clan, so he didn't want to get in trouble by getting a new formidable enemy. Yi Shiwen also did not want to develop a habit of stirring up trouble wherever he goes. The crowd did not continue to look at Yi Shiwen because assessment examination had finally started. Good night, guys. Monday. Bonus chapters 93 and 94 will come along with Sunday's regular chapter 95 and Monday's regular chapter 96 raised so far. $60, 200%. Queue is cleared for bonus chapters 93 and 94. Chapter 93. Thanks to Jeffrey Demonier France for sponsoring Chapter 93. Chapter 93. Wanmo's surprise attack, the assessment examination, had finally begun, and this was going to be a turning point in their lives. Yi Shiwen also did not have many thoughts about Huang Menghan, because at the moment, one could say that he was still very far away from her. A purple-clothed old man flew from a distant place and arrived in front of the disciples. He was an elder of Full Moon Peak, and without any idle talk, he just looked at the crowd, then said, "This entry assessment examination begins." The purple-clothed elder conveniently waved his hand, and suddenly, the space began to violently fluctuate. A mysterious streak of light appeared out of nowhere, and it seemed that the whole space had been ripped open and a gate formed which slowly opened with a loud rumble. Suddenly, a large amount of lingqi, mixed with disgusting gas, spewed out from the gate. Fortunately, the Hodian realm disciples had not yet opened up the world bridge, and so they couldn't feel the sudden discharge of lingqi from the gate. However, those Xiantian realm disciples suddenly felt the presence of this disgusting gas and frowned with a clear displeasure on their faces. However, it was not surprising for everyone because they had already been informed by their elders that there were a large number of Huanma devils present in the Huanma territory, so of course, there would be a large amount of magic present in the atmosphere. In fact, so far, it was found that only devil race could biologically adapt to Machi. Even the most violent and powerful demon beasts couldn't withstand the direct instill of Machi. Machi can mean devil chi or magical chi. However, Yi Zaiwen's eyes had brightened when he discovered that the special space in his mind was able to absorb the Machi. He already knew that he could absorb the lingqi present in the atmosphere in the mysterious space, but had never done it before because the absorption effectiveness of lingqi from the atmosphere was too slow. Even in the lingqi-enriched environment of Yuan School, the absorption rate of lingqi was very less compared to that of the lingqi present in the spirit stones. After all, formation of these spirit stones would take innumerable years of absorption of lingqi, so it was natural that it would be easy to extract lingqi from spirit stones. Yi Shiwen thought, since he could absorb the machi in the special space, then he might also be able to absorb yaoqi or other energy forms of qi as well. Yaoqi means evil qi, but Yi Shiwen didn't have enough time to think of this matter as the sub-school teams had started entering the Huanma territory one by one according to their ranks. The team of Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School also walked towards the entrance of Huanma territory. The purple-clothed elder waved his hand, and a huge bubble formed, and they were wrapped inside it, and the team quickly disappeared from the eyes of the crowd. No one knew after how long. The team of Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School finally appeared in the Huanma territory, and everywhere, they could see a devastated scenery. The ground was withered, and from time to time, magical fire was coming out of the fissures in the ground, and the air containing the mixture of lingqi and machi was blowing on their faces. The environment here was quite harsh, and originally, this territory belonged to the devil race which was once destroyed, and they had already left. Not to mention those Huanma devils were the remaining part of the lost devil civilization. It was similar to a situation where a modern man would leave the city to live in the forest for decades. Is this Huanma territory? It is even more desolate than expected. One of the disciples sighed and said, "Yes." Zhang Yang nodded. "It seems like the random transportation like the last time, and without a map, we do not even know our location. There's no need to hurry. Once we find a Huanma city, we will naturally get a map from there." Yi Feng said, as in the Huanma territory, Huanma race should be considered the indigenous, and it was not surprising if they had a map. Moreover, Huanma belonged to the devil race, but they certainly were intelligent creatures. Therefore, they also had small towns in the Huanma territory, but these towns were simply just a prototype and couldn't be regarded as real towns. Suddenly, the air distorted and the surrounding scenery instantly changed, and in a flash, numerous tall buildings and a bustling metropolis took shape in front of Yishuan. Yishuan suddenly felt nostalgic about this scenery. For a long time, he had not seen such scenery which used to be so common for him. That very common scenery containing the reinforced concrete buildings of the city, but at this moment seemed so friendly. This scene was buried deep inside his heart, but he did not know when it would disappear. Yishuan suddenly sneered and punched forward, containing the terrifying might of a tornado which swept clean the scene instantly. At this time, the nostalgic scene disappeared and returned back into the scene of Huanma territory. As he had expected, this was really the illusion magic. Although he was well prepared before coming, as Lin Zhantian had reminded everyone to be attentive in the Huanma territory. Huanma excelled at using illusion magic to confuse people, and once someone fell into the trap, he will be quickly defeated or even eaten. Sure enough, when Yishuan opened his eyes, he saw hundreds of Huanma heading towards them. Their bodies were very small, only 2 feet tall, for arms, and the size of their head was almost more than their whole body. 2 huge red eyes were flickering with ominous rays of light, and their big bloody mouths were open and were rushing towards the team of Qingfeng Mountain Subschool. A Huanma had already rushed to the front of Yishuan. Yishuan sneered and shot his palm, producing a thunderstorm rumbling sound, pass like thunder and move like the wind, and his palm directly shot into the big mouth of the Huanma. Boom! The Hodian 9th-stage Huanma immediately exploded in a single blow. Almost in a flash, half of the body of that Huanma turned into Machi. The bodies of these Huanma devils were mostly made up of energy, coupled with the unusually large brain, which they specially used to send out illusion magic with ease. In an instant, the Machi that passed through the body of Yishuan was absorbed by the mysterious space and deepened his comprehension of various martial arts. In fact, Yi Zaiwen's martial arts practice never stopped in the special space, but when he fully immersed himself in practicing, then the efficiency also increased. And after absorbing the Machi from the dead Huanma, he realized that the comprehension speed in the mysterious space was a little faster compared to when he absorbed the Lingqi from spirit stones. But at this time, he didn't have much time to think. He instantly drew his long blade and chopped out a brilliant bladiki in the shape of several meters long bladiki, which instantly arrived in front of several Huanma, and they were split in half. At this time, Yi Feng, Zhang Yang, and Yi Ruxue, the other 3 Xiantian masters, also shattered their illusions and rushed towards the attacking Huanma. After a while, the other disciples of Qingfeng Mountain Subschool also shattered their respective illusions and joined the fight. Dash. Chapter 94. NT. Thanks to Thomas Metzger, U.S., and Corey Sagawa, U.S., for sponsoring Chapter 94. Chapter 94. Masters intercept Yishuan heaved a sigh of relief. He knew that Huanma itself was not a strong creature, but the problem was their raid. They would first release an illusion magic, and people would unknowingly fall into the illusion. Although most of the experts had firm minds and wouldn't take long to break out of the illusion, but even if they took a couple of seconds to break out, these 2 seconds would often decide their fate, because for ordinary people, 2 seconds were nothing, but that was not the case for a warrior facing Huanma raid. Sure enough, Yishuan had not expected, but the disciples of Qingfeng Mountain disciples would so easily escape from Huanma's illusion. Even if the numbers of Huanma were 5 times more than their own, under the leadership of Yishuan and the others, killing those Huanma had become child's play for the team. Everyone easily killed 1 or more Huanma and completed the assessment without any fundamental difficulty. But even after quickly slaughtering these Huanma, they were not relaxed because clearance was not their main goal. Clearing the assessment was easy, unless someone had a severe bad luck. Passing with extraordinary scores was their actual goal. Anyway, this test had a full month's time, and everyone had plenty of time to hone their skills, but also kill more Huanma for better performance. Everyone knew that their actions inside the Huanma territory were being observed by high-level school personnel, so they just needed to give a good performance to catch their attention. Now that we are inside the Huanma territory, we may encounter danger at any time, and those Huanma may appear anywhere, so we have to be careful at all time. Yifeng said. Yes, the disciples said in unison. Before coming here, the goal for these disciples was to pass the assessment, and then only they would think about getting good results. But since Yi Shiwen was with them, their morale had increased. In their hearts, Yi Shiwen had completely replaced Yi Feng, although Yi Shiwen was younger in age, but to them, he was just like their spiritual leader. Yi Ziwen's strength was still not comparable to that of Shangwan Xuani, but his strength was still among the group of disciples with their strengths right below the 3 strongest disciples. And being led by such a strong master was very assuring for them, as anyway, they won't die in the Huanma territory. However, Yifeng was keeping silent and was not talking much after coming to the Huanma territory, because he was little anxious as Huanma were not their only opponents. Even excluding the 3 major subschools, there still were a lot of strong subschools with many Xiantian masters. These Xiantian masters from various subschools had come from all over the Great Yu State to enter into a Yuan school and possessed different kinds of martial arts and unknown killing techniques and skills. So far, they had not yet encountered another team, but sooner or later, they might encounter a very formidable opponent. Although they won't die in the Huanma territory, but they would still be thrown outside after dying. Days passed, and shortly, the Qingfeng Mountain crowd had spent more than 3 days in the Huanma territory. In 3 days, they faced Huanma raids several times, but the crowd had already become experienced in fighting off the Huanma and had at least beheaded 56 Huanma. And with that, they had extraordinarily completed the assessment. Wu Hao and Qian Wanru were on the verge of having a breakthrough, and it seemed that they might have it in the Huanma territory. It was a good thing for them that they were going to enter into the Xiantian realm before joining the main sect. On this day, they approached a mountain and were thinking about exploring it when suddenly 7 figures jumped out and intercepted them. They were in every respect, releasing an extremely terrifying aura, and were definitely very powerful Xiantian masters. The complexion of the disciples of Qingfeng Mountain Subschool suddenly changed. 7 powerful Xiantian masters had actually come out of nowhere and intercepted them. One must know that even a moderate-ranked subschool had less than 7 Xiantian masters, and Qingfeng Mountain Subschool had only 4. And each of these 7 Xiantian masters had a strong Xiantian aura, and the weakest of them was at least a master of Xiantian second stage, which had totally startled them. "Who are you people? Why are you blocking our way?" Yi Shiwen came forward and asked. He had noticed 3 of these 7 masters in the plaza. He was paying attention to the strong masters in the plaza and had made a mental note of the top players from various subschools. He knew that these people were one of the strongest Xiantian masters of this year. But he had not seen the other 4 masters, and it was possible that they didn't belong to any subschools and were definitely newcomers. After all, the Yuan school was one of the 4 great sects and held a huge influence in the Great Yu Stat. So during the triennial examination, the aspiring disciples were not only from the respective subschools but from all parts of the state. Various powerful clans from all over the Great Yu State would also send their elite disciples to join the main sect and bring glory to their clans. Although the number of disciples who had entered the Huanma territory to participate in the assessment exam was very large, but Huanma territory was very huge, much larger compared to Blood Yuan territory, and therefore, they had not encountered other disciples for these many days. But as the days would pass, the number of encounters would continue to grow more and more. These people were not very old and seemed around the age of 20, but all of them had a dignified appearance and presumably were top masters in the younger generation of their clans. "You are Yi Shiwen?" The Chinese-robed young man who was standing in the middle and seemed like the leader of these 7 masters asked. All the sub-school disciples had heard about the recent exploits of Yi Shiwen because the rumors had made him quite famous among the disciples as the undefeated sub-school disciple. The disciples from other schools or clans who didn't belong to any sub-schools were generally very talented. After all, they were not stupid. If they try to enter into the main sect with poor strength, then they would only become handyman disciples. That is the reason why only strong masters of Xiantian realm would come to join the Yi Yuan school's main sect. Yi Zaiwen's heart sank when he heard that they had actually come for him. He looked towards the Chinese robed man and replied, "It's me, what do you want?" Chapter 95. NT. Chapter 95 is Sunday's regular chapter. I will try to release regular chapter 96 in few hours otherwise. It will come in Tuesday's grand release along with sponsored chapters 97, 98, 99, and 100. Chapter 95. Your family members are bugs. It's me. What do you want? Yi Shiwen looked at the 7 people, and almost all of them looked dignified and seemed like the elite disciples from their respective clans or schools. But this time, they had actually come to join the main sect. Your journey ends here, the Chinese-robed young man coldly said. You should know that you must never offend people you can't resist. Among these 7 people, not even one of them had a lower cultivation than Yi Shiwen. All of them had a terrifying presence. Not to mention, they had come together for him, so it was going to get rough. The 4 of them standing on the sides were amazingly at the peak of Xiantian's second stage with 40% transformed Xiantian Jinshi. The 3 in the middle were at the Xiantian third stage with 50% transformed Xiantian Jinshi. Chinese-robed young man standing in the middle had an amazing aura and was staring coldly at Yi Shiwen, as if he was looking at a bug. On his left was a diminutive young youth with a sinister look on his face, and his expression resembled that of a poisonous snake. On his right was an extremely seductive woman dressed in purple Chinese dress, exposing her nice figure. But there was a cold expression on her face. Yi Shiwen noticed that this trio would prove to be very tough opponents for him, and it would be very difficult to deal with any of them. He needed to be very careful while fighting them. He could easily take on each of these 7 masters in a one-on-one battle, and Huanma territory was best for battles like this. But right now, the situation was a little perilous for him because all 7 of them had come together for his life, and he didn't even know how he had offended them or exactly whom he had offended. In the end, he might not have enough energy left to fight all of them. How can there be so many strong Xiantian masters? Yi Feng's heart sunk down because he was only at the peak of Xiantian first stage, and except Yi Shiwen, no one else in the team was more powerful than him. Because of this, he could clearly feel the terrifying aura of these 7 masters and knew that they very strong. It's scary, Yi Rushiwa muttered. Yi Shiwen, you will die today without even getting a chance to fight back. That senior said to teach you a lesson to make you understand your own status, so that you know whom you should get close to and with whom you should not. The diminutive youth licked his lips, and a killing intent flashed in his eyes. Hu Yanghang, in Yi Zaiwen's mind, that name immediately cropped up. That diminutive youth had already given him enough hints that it was easy to guess the enemy's identity. This Hu Yanghang was really very insidious and ruthless, just to make him understand to not get close to Huan Menghan. He had planned all this to teach him a lesson in Huanma territory. Yi Shiwen's heart was filled with anger and hatred for that arrogant bastard who thought he was superior to others and couldn't mind his own damn business. Let me teach him a lesson. A blue-robed youth came forward and said, We are not your enemies, but you still must intercept us. This is really going too far. Qian Wanru said with indignation. You all leave right now. Yi Shiwen suddenly said. How can we just go and leave you alone? Yi Rushiwa said in a worried tone. These people are the top players, and even if you stay, you won't be of much help. Yi Shiwen said like a true leader because he knew that sometimes quantity could not make up for strength. Except Yi Shiwen, the strongest among them was Yi Feng, who was only at the peak of Xiantian first stage, and most of other disciples were still the masters of the Hodian realm. If they stayed, it would be totally meaningless to fight a hopeless battle, so they might as well leave in advance. Hey, you are quite knowledgeable. The diminutive young people sneered, and since their main goal was just Yi Shiwen, they didn't care about other weaklings. Everyone thought the same, because that was the truth. Under the siege of so many strong Xiantian masters, their presence would only prove to be an obstacle for Yi Shiwen. Qingfeng Mountain people quickly made their decisions, and so did Yi Shiwen, and most importantly, in the Huanma territory, Even if someone died inside, they would immediately be thrown outside, so it was not that Yi Shiwen was really in a life-threatening danger. After thinking a lot and making their decisions soon, the Qingfeng Mountain crowd left, leaving only Yi Shiwen and the seven masters on the scene. Yi Shiwen was relieved because now he could display his full strength and go all out without caring about anything. Good, those bugs are gone. Hey, it seems that you are quite famous among the disciples of your sub-school. The blue-robed youth sneered and said, "Bugs!" A killing intent flashed in Yi Ziwen's eyes. The blue-robed youth took a step, and like a tornado, he rushed towards Yi Shiwen. With his fist forming a huge storm, and a terrifying twisting Quanjin suddenly arrived in front of Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen sneered and shot his palm. Rushing Thunder Hand, passed like thunder and moved like the wind, and with a rumbling sound of thunder, his palm wrapped in lightning like Zhun Qi instantly greeted the coming fist. Boom! The collision produced a loud sound accompanied with layer by layer of shockwaves rushing in all directions, as if the mighty waves were running on the surface of the sea. These waves became a huge twisting storm and swept off the scene. The fights between Xiantian and Hotian realm masters would always be on entirely different levels because Xiantian masters could directly stimulate the Lingqi fluctuations in the atmosphere, making these fights highly destructive. Yi Ziwen's terrifying palm attack had easily blocked off and wiped out the storm created by the blue-robed youth's attack. There was a surprised look on his face as he did not expect his attack to be effortlessly blocked off by Yi Shiwen. Bugs, Yi Shiwen sneered. Your family members are bugs. Yi Shiwen instantly rushed towards him, as if a celestial being was talking a stroll, and with a group of thundercloud like Zhun Qi covering his right hand, he shoved it towards the body of that blue-robed youth. He didn't even have a chance to react. The three powerful masters suddenly shouted, "Stop! You dare! Stop!" Yi Shiwen didn't care about these people and instantly shot his palm. Boom! The thunder like Zhun Qi blasted into the chest that blue-robed youth and instantly blasted him away. He was sent flying into the sky, but suddenly his stature turned into a streamer and directly disappeared. Chapter 96. NT. This is a regular chapter. Chapter 96. Arduous Battle Boom. The thunder like Zhun Qi blasted into the chest that blue-robed youth and instantly blasted him away. He was sent flying into the sky, but suddenly his stature turned into a streamer and directly disappeared. He died in Huama territory, but he didn't really die, but disappeared into a streamer and was thrown back into the outside world. How dare you? The remaining 6 people were looking at Yi Shiwen with a look of disbelief on their faces. They just couldn't digest the fact that Yi Shiwen had actually killed their comrade in a blink of an eye. They just never thought that things would turn out like this. They were overconfident, and looking at their strengths, this assessment was going to be very easy for them. When they were given the task to ambush Yi Shiwen and teach him a lesson, they had considered this task a child's play. After all, he was just one guy, and his strength was also below their own. They had imagined that he would be crushed to death in a single blow from that blue-robed youth. But what just happened? Yi Shiwen sneered and said, "One bug crushed, and now it's your turn. Will you all come together, or one by one?" Yi Shiwen took a deep breath, relaxed his whole body, concentrated. He must fight because he had no chance of retreat. His only option was to go all out, not to mention that he wouldn't die here. So this was a good opportunity to fight so many powerful masters and gain experience. Since this was an examination, and these rivals could be called his enemies, so he could only continue to conquer his enemies one by one, and then only he would be able to become invincible. Yi Shiwen even had a crazy idea to use the extraordinary strengths of these 6 men and force his inner state to its limits. Then he might be able to have a breakthrough, because it was said that a breakthrough could be initiated during a life and death situation by forcing oneself to the extreme. You are courting death. Arrogant. These masters were suddenly outraged as whether they belonged to sub-schools or other outer forces coming from all over the state. But there was no doubt that all of them were top talents from their respective forces and had never been insulted like this. Not to mention, they had come to crush him, But now one of them had been crushed instead, and he had dared to insult them as well. Yi Zaiwen's provocation had hurt their pride and dignity, and this unexpected humiliation had caused their anger to suddenly erupt. "Kill him!" All 6 of them shouted and rushed towards Yi Shiwen. Being the outstanding disciples in their forces, each of them possessed one or more secret Xiantian power techniques, practiced to the profound level. At this time, various types of martial arts blasted towards Yi Shiwen. He finally pulled out a long blade from the scabbard on his back and waved it violently, which instantly shot a dazzling blade light towards the incoming rumbling attacks. Boom! A heart-shaking loud sound burst out, sending shockwaves in all directions, causing the smoke and dust to spread in surrounding area. Yi Zaiwen's body was fully wrapped in Xiantian Jinqi body, and he leaped up towards the sky, and instead of retreating back, he used Celestial Step, and in a flash, his figure rushed horizontally all the way towards the 6 masters with his long blade, scattering a bright blade light. Ah! A master didn't get a chance to evade the blade attack, and was split in half and disappeared in the very next instant. This was indeed a terrifying battle where the fight had begun only an instant ago, and a master had already been beheaded. The remaining 5 didn't have a shred of mercy and severely attacked Yi Shiwen. Even if he was using Celestial Steps, he had been hit several times, and many wounds appeared on his body. "Yi Shiwen, you are strong. I admit that you are very strong, but unfortunately you are facing so many of us and you no chance of winning. Just surrender, because anyway no one really dies in this Huanma territory," the Chinese-robed young man said. He was a prideful person, but he had to admit that Yi Shiwen was ridiculously strong, because even if they were ganging up on one individual, but they were still having a hard time coping with him. There was clearly a look of disdain on their faces, because 2 of their own had been effortlessly defeated by the guy they had initially looked down upon, but he was still giving them a hard time in this brutal fight, so they had to admit that Yi Shiwen was truly formidable. Yi Shiwen sneered but didn't answer. He was bathed in blood, but the wounds couldn't make him to withdraw, but only made him to have a clear understanding that although no one would die in the Huanma territory, but they would still get mentally and physically injured. In the world of martial arts, there was no retreat, giving up was never an option, and the most important practice was to persevere, or else all previous efforts would come to naught. Yi Shiwen was not planning to give up just because he had sustained injuries. This time, he strengthened his determination with the thought that this was an illusion, so he must persevere to break out of it. Phew! A subtle piercing sound echoed, and out of the blue, it seemed as if a dagger had arrived to the front of Yi Shiwen. But it was actually that diminutive youth. He was extremely fast and had practiced a strange agility technique because his movements were similar to that of snakes, which could easily scare people. But suddenly, the Chinese rogue youth appeared in front of Yi Shiwen and blasted his punch, releasing a golden quanjin. It seemed as if a golden light had illuminated the entire world, but the atmosphere had been distorted by the burst of this golden quanjin. A cold light flashed in Yi Zaiwen's eyes, and the spirit stone started to burn, producing an unimaginable amount of lingqi, which was directly injected into the special space. A large influx of martial arts experience entered into his mind, and it would be no exaggeration to say that he was trying his best to surpass his own limits. When fighting against 5 strong Xiantian masters, most people would have already lost confidence by now. And talking about most people, there was simply no chance for them to grab the victory in a situation like this. But Yi Shiwen refused to give up on the slightest hope of victory. These series of attacks were extremely dangerous. No need to say that Chinese rogue youth was the most terrifying opponent. The charming woman had a hand mirror, and she was using it to constantly send out waves of intermittent divine streaks of light, and wherever the light would shine, the space would immediately distort. The might of her attack was abnormally terrifying. This was the biggest crisis Yi Shiwen had ever come across. A crazed look flashed in Yi Zaiwen's eyes. The long blade incessantly danced in his hand, and instantly 9 blade shadows appeared in the sky. Boom! The quanjin of that Chinese rogue youth bombed fiercely on Yi Zaiwen's body. He spat a mouthful of blood, and his black hair flew upwards, but his body was like an iron wall that didn't budge at all. Instead, he continued to swing his long blade, with all of his focus centered on the diminutive youth. Boom! Yi Zaiwen's long blade chopped out towards the flying dagger-like diminutive youth, releasing the 9 blade shadows which blocked off all of his escape routes. Wednesday. Since the queue didn't clear for Tuesday's grand release, Chapter 97 will come as a regular release on Wednesday, along with bonus chapters depending on the queue completion. I can release up to 3 sponsored chapters. Raised so far, $45, 150%. Queue cleared for sponsored Chapter 98, 100%. Queue status for sponsored Chapter 99, 50%. Thanks to Thomas Edwards, New Zealand, born in Missapeter, Hungary, and Abelkrim Wahasna, France, for sponsoring Chapter 98, 100%. Thanks to David Pedersen, Sweden, for opening the queue for sponsored Chapter 99, 50%. That you're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.